happened a couple of years ago, but I feel like I'm ready to talk about it. In 2016, I had just turned 18 and was in my second semester of community college. I was lucky to go take a few specialized classes that were requirements for my major. These classes required me to drive about 45 minutes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to the main campus of my community college system. That's relevant because I was going to a town that I didn't know much about and didn't know anyone who lived there. There was a man in my class named Eddie. He was a big guy in his late 40s. I'm 5'0" and at the same time was about 130 pounds, which is just to say I was pretty small and defenseless. He spent a lot of time in the lab for these classes and he was stationed right across from me. I was a bit more naive and unsuspecting at the time and wanted to be nice, so I talked with him and my other classmates quite a bit and was a lot friendlier to him than I would be nowadays. He started being overly friendly to me and would stand too close and ask too many personal questions. He'd even flirt with me in class to the point it seemed to make even other people uncomfortable to watch. He also started staring at me a lot, with an intense look that scared me. Of course, being young and not wanting to hurt his feelings, I decided to ignore it as best as I could. I told my boyfriend about it, but again, Eddie hadn't actually done anything to me, so there wasn't a lot I felt like I should do. A few weeks after that started, all of us were hanging out in a small break room type area, studying for an exam in our next class, which was about 30 minutes away. I was sitting at one table chatting with some middle-aged women in my class, and Eddie was at the next table, over messing with his phone. I announced that I was going to get something from the vending machine and stood up. As I did, he tried and failed to discreetly turn his phone towards me and snapped pictures of me as I walked to the machine, got my drink and bent over to pick it up. I realized what was going on as I was walking back to my seat, with him still taking photos, and I shot him a look. He put his phone away and just sat there staring at me. I was trying to look mad, but honestly, I was just really freaked out. I excused myself from the table and called my boyfriend near tears, telling him what happened. He was mad and said that I needed to tell somebody, but I said no. I didn't want to make a scene. He tried to comfort me as much as he could, but I had to go to class soon afterwards. Our last class finished at about 9 p.m. and since it was January, it was completely dark out when we all walked to our cars. I was actually texting one of my guy friends about what happened when Eddie walked up to my car, stopped for a second and looked at me through my windscreen, then slowly kept walking, watching me through my driver's side window the whole time. He was parked nowhere near me, and the wind chill was below 0, so he had to have made a point to walk by my car like that. I was terrified, and with my hands shaking, I started my car and drove home as fast as I could, calling my boyfriend on the way crying. After that, I decided I needed to talk to my professor about what was going on. I was nervous, but I asked her the next week if I could talk to her privately when class was over. We went to her office and I told her about Eddie and what he had done and how weird he was acting towards me. She told me that she noticed him tensing up and going quiet when he got close to me, and had noticed him paying a lot of attention to me. Told me she believed me about the pictures. It was honestly amazing with how she handled it. She promised me that she would move things around where I'd be away from him in the lab and asked if I wanted her to talk to him about it. I said no, that I didn't want to make him angry, and she said that she'd respect that, but she was going to have the security guard stand at the door and watch me go to my car every night, and that she'd tell the program director what was going on. But Eddie wouldn't know that I had talked to her. By the time we got done, it had been 30 minutes since class had ended, and she offered to walk me outside. I'm glad she did, because when we came out of the elevator to the first floor, Eddie was sitting in the foyer alone. Everybody else had gone home. My blood ran cold, but I tried to act as normal as I could. He seemed as surprised to see our professor there as she was to see him. She asked why he was still there, and he said he noticed my car was still parked out front. I wanted to make sure I didn't have to walk out by myself. Pretty sure I was pale as a ghost, but my professor gave him a look that I couldn't read and said not to worry. She's walking me to my car, and from now on the security guard will be here every night. He said that was good and quickly said goodnight and left. It still chills me to think about what could have happened if my professor hadn't walked me down to my car that night. I have no idea what he was capable of doing. After this, she rearranged our seating and made sure we were never grouped together, and I started making sure I walked out to my car at the same time as a few other women in my class. The security guard was usually in the foyer, and we only had a couple months left of class, so there wasn't really any other incidents, but I still caught him staring at me sometimes, and he still looked like he had pure rage in him. It's been a few years. I don't go to that school anymore, and I'm moving to a completely different city soon. I'm a lot more assertive and stronger now. But Eddie, you're a creep, and please stay away from me. I met my stalker when I was in middle school. My school consisted of 7th grade through 12th grade and had a normal program and an accelerated program, with the students in each program being slightly segregated. My friends and I belonged to the accelerated program, but there was one guy in the group from the normal one, Carson. All in all, we were typical teenagers, with Carson being the group's prankster. We could only hang out at school because we were all shifted from various parts of the country for the accelerated program, so after school we would always get on AOL to chat and play games. Online we had even more friends, as we would invite our local friends to chat with us. One day Carson invited his friend Steve to join the chat. He was nice and contributed a lot to the conversation. We learned Steve actually attended our school, but he was in the normal program and had a different lunch period than the rest of us, so we had almost no chance of crossing paths. We insisted on meeting him, however, and scheduled for Steve to come to my locker before first period. The next morning we waited and Steve never came. My friends and I did have a short exchange with another kid, Marco, which consisted of us telling him to go away. Marco had been Carson's satellite since the beginning of the year. Wherever Carson went, Marco would stand 10 to 15 feet away just watching us. We had tried being friends with him, but he was simply too strange for us. He would touch your face unexpectedly, or try and sneak up behind you to bite you, or tell you he wanted to see you inside out. His list of strange behaviors was a mile long. A few days after Steve failed to come meet us, it came to light that Steve was really Marco, and that the whole thing was one of Carson's pranks. Considering Marco had been a pleasant addition to the chat as Steve, we gave him another chance to join the real group. Besides Carson, I was the only person that really gave Marco a chance. He still did weird things that he'd always been doing, but it was now apparent that it was all an act to get attention for being the weird guy. Marco was being abused at home by his mom's boyfriend. He rarely saw his mom because she worked so much. Marco was the poster child for bad attention, is still attention. Still, my friends wanted him out of the group, and I repeatedly found myself arguing his case to let him stay. Once I caught an older student, a boy that lived on my street, beating Marco up. Being much larger than either of us, he literally was picking Marco up and slaying him into lockers while calling him a freak. Knowing the bully and his mom, I did what my signature move at the time was, and kicked him in the balls while threatening to tell to his parents about how he was treating me and my friends. I believe this was the catalyst for years of torment, as Marco became my satellite after that day. At school, Marco followed me any chance he got. At home, Marco messaged me nonstop, typically in private chat, as my other friends wanted nothing to do with him. I felt bad because he was a sweet kid, besides his attention-seeking stunts, and no one should have to go through life with no friends. Eventually, Marco asked me out, which I politely declined. He was my friend, but not the type of guy I would ever be interested in dating. But he was persistent, begging me to give him a chance. Over and over again, I would have to tell him no. One day, his approach changed. You will go out with me, or I will show your mom all of our chat logs. There was nothing especially bad in the logs. I wasn't drinking or doing drugs or really anything bad, but I was pretty depressed at the time, and sometimes talked about that and might have been a little bit embarrassed. If my parents saw that, I could effectively kiss my freedom and privacy goodbye. I bluffed him, telling him good luck with any attempts to convince my parents to believe him over me, which seemed to work. I wasn't very impressed with the stunt and stopped talking to him. A few weeks went by and Marco came crawling back, begging for forgiveness. I eventually caved, allowing him back into the group. At first he was well behaved again, but slowly he started pestering me to be his girlfriend. Over the course of high school, he tried many different methods: begging, blackmailing, attacking my self-esteem. You're ugly or you're a slut. Catfishing, threatening any guys I dated, threatening a lot more than just that. But I tried to be nice at first and eventually had to get pretty mean in how I said no. His behavior would always reach a boiling point that forced me to cut him out of our friend group. It was nearly impossible to actually get rid of him, however. Online, he would create dozens of new accounts to send messages from, overwhelming my attempts to block him. He would call my phone all night long and leave woeful messages about how lonely he was, and just constantly blackmailing if I stopped being his friend. He would show up at my house and stand outside my bedroom window randomly. When my parents had parties, 4th of July, Thanksgiving, Halloween, etc., he always managed to find out and show up. Their parties were always pretty big with an open door policy, so he'd slip in, typically in disguise. He'd then ultimately do something to get thrown out, like get belligerently drunk or stuff his face with finger foods, then put them back on the serving platters. The first time I really felt that Marco might actually be a threat was at one of my parents' Halloween parties when we were 16. One of my dad's friends had a son our age, Tim, who was a bit of a jerk. He fancied himself pretty cool and thought it would be fun to pick a fight with the weird kid to make a display of his own superior strength. Marco accepted his challenge. We all knew he was about to get the crap beat out of him. Going out into the streets, Tim towered over Marco. That year, Marco was dressed as Alex from A Clockwork Orange, his favorite book, with his costume including a cane. He swung the cane at Tim, hitting him in the head with it. Tim went down quickly and Marco beat him until an adult intervened and sent him home. Marco's go-to threat whenever I had a boyfriend was, I'll beat him to death with a shovel and then use it to bury his body. Suddenly, his threat seemed like something he'd be capable of. Our senior year of high school, Marco's dad died in prison. He learned the real reason his dad was in prison was for murdering somebody. He'd always thought his dad was in for drugs, and Marco started to spiral out of control. He said his dad was a murderer, so he must also be doomed to be a murderer. He dropped out of school halfway through the year. My brother said after I'd left home for college, Marco came to the house looking for me a few times. Once he figured out I wasn't there, he'd just come and stand in front of the yard aimlessly, playing with a big lighter, until somebody threatened to call the police. One of my biggest worries was that he tried to set their house on fire in some weird way of trying to punish me. When I'd go home with my boyfriend, he'd always show up at my parents' house. At one point, he tried to intimidate my boyfriend into breaking up with me by showing him he had a hunting knife. It was always a big ordeal getting him to leave. A lot of the issues have now eased up just due to the distance and time. I don't use much social media anymore, and I'm able to semi-block people on my phone. It's a bit weird. I can see when a blocked number tries to call me but it doesn't ring, and I'm able to receive voicemails and text messages from blocked numbers but not pictures. Initially, he was calling and texting every day. Hundreds of messages. I tried asking him to stop, but this only encouraged him. My family no longer lives in that area, so I'm significantly less worried for their safety. I found the most successful way of dealing with Marco is simply ignoring him. Eventually, his messages dwindled down to once a week, then once a month. Now, I maybe hear from him officially once a year. His message is typically something along the lines of, "Please just be my friend. I won't try anything more. I need you in my life." The last time I actually talked to him, which was about 4 to 5 years ago now, Marco tried to tell me I ruined his life. He said I'd put some spell on him that he couldn't move forward with his life. His most recent MO is to call my work phone from a private number just to hear me answer it and then hang up. He also calls and texts my brother, our high school friends, my brother's best friend, my parents, my grandparents, my aunt, and my husband, to beg them to ask me to call him. Marco messaged my husband, "Tell her she is my angel, the love of my life. I'm nothing without her." I worry he will someday snap and show up at my house or my job and try to kill me. I have security systems and other means of protection, but I still get paranoid about it. I've talked to police about getting a restraining order, but they've told me there's no real grounds unless he does start showing up and threatening to kill me, so I guess we'll see what happens. I was 15. Dumpy, plumpy, and chumpy. It was my second annual summertime mission trip with my youth group from church, and I was excited to meet boys and help some old people in the rural area to repair their houses. The trips were large organized events, drawing youth groups from a large region of the US. I was always pretty bookish, so spending a week outside with my friends was always a different/fun experience. I was friendlier than usual on these trips. I would trade addresses with anybody who wanted to kit on these trips. I thought everybody wanted to be my friend on these trips. That particular year, I met a man, Brett. He was on the trip in a youth leader capacity, being that he was in his mid-20s and in college, as opposed to the middle/high school teenagers the trips were intended for. He mingled with the teens the same as the other leaders, and we all got on well, and everything was super fun and great, as innocent as it can be on the trip. I didn't think much about him at all, much less think twice about swapping addresses and phone numbers with him at the end of the trip. I did that with all my friends. A week later, after getting home from the trip, I receive a letter from Brett. I write him back, simple enough. I guess we're pen pals now, it's cool. A couple weeks later, I get another letter from Brett along with a prepaid phone card so I could call him, if I wanted to. I was apparently totally oblivious to everything at this point in my life because I called. We talked weekly on the phone and continued to write. It was all platonic to me. So when a few months later he called my father and asked his permission to drive a state over to visit me for a weekend, I was a little confused but shrugged it off like, oh well, maybe college is lonely. I don't know. Because I was a child and was like, sure, if he wants to. Whatever. The plan was for him to get a motel nearby and hang out for the weekend. guess from a kid's perspective, a 23-year-old to 25-year-old dude wanting to spend a weekend with a 15-year-old isn't weird. I have no idea where my mind was. So the weekend arrives and Brett drives straight to my house to have dinner with me and my family. He brought me a toy, Donkey from Shrek. I wasn't ever and still am not a big Shrek fan, so this was very random, and a big ass bag of mini Jawbreakers. We have dinner with the fam, during which Brett shares his plans for the weekend, going out to movies and out to meals, etc. Date stuff. My dad was firm in that he wouldn't be allowing me to go anywhere with him alone. I walked Brett out to his car after dinner, then never spoke to him or saw him again. I always thought it was just a weird friendship and realized much later in life, it's now been 17 years since then, that he as an adult was attempting to court me, a child, and bailed when he learned that my dad was not on board. Growing up in the bottom was sometimes difficult. When the flood came every year, it severely limited my roaming area. Unless the flood was actually in our yard, which was a rare occurrence, most of the kids from the bottom would normally wind up playing football or baseball in our yard. Altogether, there were probably 8 or 10 kids that would get together. The kids from the bottom and some other neighbors. We'd choose teams and play whatever games was popular at that moment. When we moved away in November of 1984, it was a sad time for me because I was leaving behind the only friends I'd ever known, some of whom I'd known since kindergarten. I was 15 when we moved away from Kennefic and the bottom. We moved for several reasons. My father got a better job offer in another state. My mom had attended a college for cake decorating and wanted to start her own business in a bigger town. And our trailer house was starting to show its age. I think the most important reason my parents decided to move was that the population of Kennefic and the bottom had grown. The bottom being what it was, it attracted a less than perfect quality of resident. In the last few years that we lived there, the police were coming out more and more often. Bottom seemed to become a refuge for those who weren't on the best of terms with the law enforcement community. There were more and more cars and trucks driving faster than was safe at all hours of the night. It was a rare weekend that we didn't see blue and red lights go whizzing by our house or hear a screaming siren. One night, a helicopter landed in the field across from our house and was met by an ambulance a few minutes later. We heard later that somebody had broken into a house in the bottom and had been shot. It wasn't that tight-knit little community anymore. There were more and more strange cars and faces. Summer of 1984 was eventful for me on several levels. I turned 15 in July and got my first razor amongst my other gifts. My voice had finally stopped squeaking. I grew to 5'10". I'm 6'1" now. I was a cornerback on the high school football team. Dad was teaching me how to work on cars by fixing up an old 73 Cougar for me to finally have when I got my license. And I was in love with a girl who lived down the street from us. Her name is Heather, and she consumed my every thought, wish, and desire. We'd known each other since her family moved in about a year after us, and we'd ridden the bus together for almost 9 years. She was my first crush, first kiss, first love, and first heartbreak. Heather was a year younger than me, and we went from hating each other in elementary school to tolerating each other in junior high. When I started high school, she was still in junior high, so we went to different schools. I can remember the first day I noticed her as something other than that skinny little black-haired girl from down the street. It was when school started after the Christmas vacation, and she got on the bus and was wearing new glasses. Weird, I know, but those glasses seemed to magnify the prettiest green eyes I'd ever seen. She'd caught me staring at her as she walked by to sit with her friends and smiled at me. Braces. Wow. By the time she started high school the next year, we were a serious item. Her mother and my mother were good friends, and her mom would always say something that would embarrass the crap out of me. "You two will have the cutest kids," or "I think I hear wedding bells." Of course she was teasing, but still. Every time we left our house to go for a walk or to do homework or whatever, her dad would give me the sternest look and would say, "Be nice." I know exactly what he meant, and I was always nice for the most part. Heather had diabetes, and it always amazed me that she had to get shots every day. Every single solitary day. I was in awe of her bravery and how she just shrugged it off as a part of life. She broke her ankle one summer jumping from a horse that got spooked, so every afternoon I would ride the bus past my house to hers and carry her books in for her, and then I would walk home. Her mom would always invite me to stay for dinner, but I never usually did. After about a week after she broke her ankle, we came home from school one day and there was a new trailer house in the next lot to hers. Her mom told us that she'd already met the family and they had a boy my age and another son who was 8 or 9. I met them a few days later when they started riding the school bus. Robert was actually a year younger than Heather. He was a tall, gangly, clumsy type of kid who wore thick glasses and was deep in the Dungeons and Dragons. He was quiet and kept to himself. We invited him to play football and do other stuff with us, but he was never interested. He read a lot and stayed indoors. Heather had already told me that he watched her whenever she was outside, but whenever she waved, he'd act like he didn't see. He was an okay guy. We got along and he taught me to play Dungeons and Dragons and another game that I can't remember now. His younger brother was named Jason. Jason was an odd duck. His head was too big for his body and his teeth and ears were too big for his head. He was mouthy too. Anything anyone had ever seen or done, he or someone he knew had seen it or done it better. It got so bad that we could actually make up words about things to see if he would take the bait, and he never let us down. He knew all about the Chevrolet Z56, 12-cylinder, 6-wheeled car that was coming out the following year. He knew all about the new bullets that the Army was developing that could shoot somebody around corners and go through tanks. He was also a klepto. Pens, rulers, Hot Wheels, baseball cards, ball caps, and anything else that wasn't guarded were fair game. The bad thing was that whenever anyone called him out on it, he'd insist that his aunt or teacher gave it to him. Robert and even his mom would always validate his story. Jason was always the instigator. He would tell one kid that another kid was talking about him just to see the reaction. Whenever we played a game, he would always want a do-over if things didn't go his way, and if we refused, he'd say we were cheaters and liars. It didn't take very long for Jason to become unwelcomed around us. One day, Heather caught him behind their well house, bent over something. She asked what he was doing, but he didn't hear, so she walked over to see. He'd found a dead bird and was pulling the feathers and skin off it. Heather said that she screamed and asked what he was doing. Said that he never moved and just looked over his shoulder at her with a spooky grin and said he wanted the skull. About a month later, Heather's father caught him inside the well house putting wrenches into his pockets. He grabbed Jason by the arm and took him to his house to make him admit to his mother that he was stealing. When Jason's mom opened the door and saw her baby being held by the arm, she went crazy and started yelling at Heather's father, telling him that she was going to sue him. As Heather was telling me all of this at their kitchen table, her dad walked by and said that Jason was a damned creepy little kid. One day a week or so later, Robert showed up at my house and asked if I'd seen Jason. He was supposed to come home for dinner and it was almost dark. I hadn't seen Jason and I relayed this to Robert. My mom heard Robert ask me about this and told him that she'd seen Jason over in the field across the road. She said that he was playing with a dog in the door of the old abandoned barn about an hour earlier. Robert and Jason missed school the next 2 or 3 days, and the next time I saw Robert on the bus, he told me that he'd found Jason in the barn with the dog. Jason had killed the dog and was skinning it. He told me that he had blood all over him like he played on it. Robert said he ran home, leaving Jason there, and told his dad about it. He and his father went back to the barn, and Jason was still inside with the dead dog. Robert said his father grabbed Jason and was dragging him out of the barn when he saw all of the skulls. He told me that there were skulls of all different kinds up on a shelf. He didn't recognize a lot of them, but he did see a little bird and mouse skulls. He said there were a lot of bigger skulls there too, probably 15 to 20. He said they were black and brown and still had some skin left on most of them. Flies were everywhere and it smelled horrible. Of course, I went straight to that old barn after school that afternoon, but somebody had taken it all away. It did smell horrible in there though, and somebody had spread sawdust all over the dirt floor. Robert told me that his father and mom had a huge fight the night before they found Jason in the barn. Robert's father was planning to take Jason to a doctor, and his mom kept insisting that he was just a little boy doing normal little boy things. Jason wasn't on the bus for 3 or 4 weeks after that. When he did go back to school, he wasn't the same person. He didn't speak to anyone or respond when spoken to. Obviously, everybody had a million and one questions, but he then just ignored them all. He just stared out the window with his mouth open and never said a word. I realize now that he must have been medicated. Eventually, the attempts to get his attention turned to ear flicks and swats to the back of his head, but there was never a response. Robert made everybody leave him alone. Then one afternoon it was raining and we were almost home when Jason started hitting himself. At first nobody noticed, but then Bobby Burrows turned around in his seat and told Robert that Jason was hitting himself in the face and that he was getting blood all over his clothes. Robert ran up and sat with Jason, holding his wrist so he would stop. That was the last time I saw Jason before I moved 2 months later. When we moved, I called Heather as soon as I knew our new phone number. We'd already said our goodbyes, but promised to keep in touch. Heather and I kept in touch through letters and cards mostly. This was before cell phones, and the long distance charges cost too much, so I was limited to an hour on the weekend. Heather told me most of the important news, though, through letters. This was before email, too. Whenever she didn't want to be overheard telling me any gossip that was good and juicy. This is also how I found out that she had gone on a date with someone else, through a letter. Sigh. Anyways, Heather told me about how Jason was back in school and how he'd get into a fight at least once a week. She said that he was talking now, but only when somebody talked to him. Then it was only a one-word response. He always had a scowl on his face and walked around with his hands clenched into fists. She said that somebody visited his house on Tuesdays and Thursdays and stayed for about 3 hours and then left. Sometimes they could hear Jason screaming at whoever it was. She told me that he was getting weirder by the day, that he was up all hours of the night standing at his window and looking outside for hours. Heather also told me that she thought Jason's mom was on drugs. Evidently, she'd spoken to Heather and called her Stephanie one time and Sandra the next. Over the next few years, Heather and I continued to keep in touch. She told me about her prom and even sent pictures. By this time, I'd met my next love and wasn't so bothered by somebody else kissing Heather. Actually, I was jealous, but I never said so. I graduated high school in 1986 and sent Heather an invitation. She graduated in 1987 and sent me one of hers in return. I still have it somewhere. She also sent a wedding announcement the following year. That one hit me pretty hard, but by then I was able to be genuinely happy for her. They didn't end up getting married though, and I cried with Heather over the phone when she told me about their breakup. I got engaged myself about 6 months after that and joined the army 2 months later. We still sent letters and cards several times a year. Occasionally, there would be a tidbit about Jason. He stole a bunch of stuff from the cars that were parked by our old house when the flood came one summer. Somebody saw him going from car to car and called the police. He broke all the windows out of another neighbor's house while they were gone for the weekend. He got caught shooting a pellet gun at someone's horses once. He was also accused of molesting a little girl from the bottom, but nothing ever came of it. In December of 1990, my unit was sent to Saudi Arabia for Desert Storm and Desert Shield. I sent Heather my APO address and told her how my fiancé had dumped me the previous month. She sent back a box of homemade chocolate chip cookies with a note that said not to worry, that they weren't sugar-free. She made me promise to be careful, tell me that she was afraid for me, and to promise to write as often as I could, which I did. I got a letter from her in the last part of May 1991 that she'd sent about 3 weeks earlier. We were still overseas and had no clue when we'd get to go home again. When I opened the letter, there was also a newspaper clipping. The clipping was from a local newspaper and was a story about a 15-year-old youth who shot another neighbor in an attempted robbery and was being charged with murder. The name of the youth was withheld because of his age, but it listed the name of the woman, Valerie. At first I thought Heather sent the clipping because we both knew Valerie. She lived 2 houses down from me, between the house where I lived and Heather's. She was a nice, bubbly, happy woman. She had a huge Great Dane named Ronto, and she painted. She was one of those people who was never in a bad mood and never had a bad word to say about anyone. She was one of the few genuinely nice people I'd ever known. She was one of those people who made the world better just by being in it. My heart stopped for a minute when I realized it was her who had been shot. I'd harbored a secret crush on Valerie when I lived there. After I read the clipping, I read Heather's letter. After she told me that she hoped I was okay and would be coming home soon, she relayed what happened. Evidently, Jason had met some of the rougher elements who lived in the bottom and started using drugs. He'd been in some more trouble here and there, and it got worse after his mother left earlier that year. Robert got married and moved to another town. He visited one night and he and Jason got into a huge fight. Heather was able to hear everything because it was a cool night and she opened the windows for some fresh air. Her parents were gone somewhere and the air conditioner, a window unit, was too loud. She went on to say that she heard them fighting and crashing into the walls and breaking things. She told me that one of them got pushed into a window and even broke it. Said that Jason was screaming so loud that his voice would crack. After about 15 minutes of this, it got quiet, and then Robert left. Heather said that she could hear Jason crying and ranting and screaming to himself. Then she saw him walking in front of her house towards Valerie's place. Valerie's husband worked at a grocery store called Brookshire Brothers in Dayton during the day and went to college at night. He was also in the National Guard and was gone 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks during the summer. Instead of getting up early on Saturday morning and driving to wherever he went for his National Guard weekends, he would leave on Friday night. Whenever he was gone, Valerie's niece would stay with her. Jason was in love with her niece. I can't remember her name now, and I never knew her when I lived there. Heather told me that she didn't give it much thought because she was trying to concentrate on her books, but then she heard shouting and saw Jason storming back to his house. She just assumed that Valerie didn't want him at her house, especially if he was high on something. Heather, who was a junior in college at this time, was studying and forgot all about it until she heard shouting again from Valerie's place about half an hour later. She said that she could hear crying too, and she could also hear Jason shouting. She turned off her desk lamp so she could see outside better, and when she looked, the front door of Valerie's house was standing open. Heather said that she was just getting ready to call the police when she heard the shot and saw Jason run out the door and head back to his own house. Heather said it scared her so bad that she couldn't move. She sat in the dark watching and listening, but afraid to draw attention to herself by moving or making any noise. Heather said that he was home for about 15 minutes, and then got into his car and left. When he was out of sight, she ran over to Valerie's house. Mr. Votal, who lived between Heather and Valerie, was already there and was calling the police. Valerie's niece was sitting on the sofa with her legs pulled up to her chest, hugging her niece. She was hysterical and crying. Mr. Votal wouldn't let Heather go into the bedroom. Heather said that he told her in a voice that was much older than it should have been to keep the door closed, that she didn't want to see anything in there. Then he told her to care for the little girl. Then they waited until the authorities arrived. Heather went on to tell me that according to the niece's statement, Jason asked if he could sit and talk for a few minutes, but Valerie didn't think it was a good idea. The niece said that his nose and lip were bleeding and that he had cuts or scratches on one arm that were bleeding. Valerie asked him to leave, and when he didn't, she got out to call the police. And that is when he started shouting and left. The girl said that about 20 minutes later, something hit the side of the house and Rontu started barking. When Valerie opened the door to see what happened, a man in a black ski mask forced her back inside with a pistol in her face. He made her lock Rontu in the bathroom and threatened to shoot him if she didn't do as he asked. When he talked, the niece recognized his voice immediately. After the dog was in the bathroom, he made them go into the bedroom and lie face down on the bed. He wanted to know if they had any money and told him that there was money in their purses. The niece said he was silent for a minute, and then she heard the gun shoot and felt the bed jerk. Then she heard Jason run out of the house. The police found Jason a few hours later at a friend's house where he was arrested. Jason was later tried as an adult and sent to prison. I don't remember the length of the sentence. As far as I know, he's still incarcerated. I remember him being a weird little kid. I can remember talking about him to some of my new friends after I'd moved and telling them that he was the type of kid that would grow up to be a terrorist or lead a cult or something. I guess I had him pegged from the start. And I guess you're wondering about me and Heather. We eventually got married, but not to each other. She married a man she met her in their senior year of college, and they lived in Conroe, Texas, with 2 girls now. I married a woman from Argentina, and they have been happy ever since. And so have we. It's funny sometimes how life works out for the best in spite of some bad times. I'm sorry this was so long. I start typing and the next thing I know it's a small book, so please share your thoughts. So this happened in 2013. This kid named Johnny moved in next door to me when he was around 12, and for the lack of a better term, this kid was pretty much a pussy. I remember one time he fell on a skateboard and didn't land hard at all and was crying his little heart out in my driveway when he was like 16. So fast forward to when this kid is like 18. By then I'm selling cocaine and Molly pretty heavily, and he's one of my best customers. By now he's hanging with some pretty shady people, which my parents obviously aren't fans of. My parents also didn't know I was ever selling anything because I was pretty good at keeping it under wraps. Johnny was clearly a follower. He went from the skater/emo type to some wannabe thug, which he just wasn't built for, so my parents go to the Outer Banks, North Carolina every year for 2 weeks and ask if I'll come stay at the house while they are gone, which I was actually excited about because their house is much better than the crappy little 1-bedroom apartment I had at the time. So everything was going fine at the house. I had my on and off again girlfriend over all the time, and there was quite a bit of drugs and alcohol going on. I was far from a saint back then, and I'll never forget it. It was a Thursday night. My girlfriend had left a few hours before. I should say earlier that day, Johnny had seen me out front of my parents and had asked for a front. I told him no, considering I never fronted anybody and in all honesty had been using too much of my own stuff so I couldn't afford to. He didn't like that very much and we got into an argument and I pretty much punked him in front of all of his little friends. So by now it's like 2 in the morning and I'm obviously nowhere near tired because of all the coke and molly. I'm sitting in the dark watching Netflix in this den/side living room my parents had downstairs, which has a window going outside which I had opened. I had paused the TV and was on my phone texting it on Facebook when I heard something. It's the screen of my window slowly being slid up. I know the sound. I had snuck in and out of this house numerous times growing up, so I slowly get up and watch the window. I clearly see the screen moving very slowly up through the curtains. So I walk up to the window, and as soon as I move the curtain, at least 3 or 4 people scatter. I run out front, but they are booking it down the street. I knew it was that Johnny kid and his friends. I didn't see them, but I knew it was those shitheads. I didn't call the cops or anything because I wasn't exactly on the right side of the law, so I just go back in and lock everything up, and the rest of the week goes smooth. I never told my parents about it, and I also never saw Johnny again. Called him a few times, which he never answered. I even offered to front him, which was bullcrap. I just wanted to see him, but he didn't reply, which was all the more reason to know it was him, and he knew that I knew. So like a month goes by and I'm watching the news, and Johnny is on it for murder, which blows my mind. He and his 3 friends went out of town, broke into some old couple's home, beat them, tied them up, and stabbed them. They burnt the house down after robbing it. They all ended up telling on each other, and he got sentenced to 35 years for testifying against his co-defendants. Makes me wonder, if I were asleep when they got in, what could have happened. Also, on a side note, after he got caught, his mom just abandoned the house they were living in, and the bank came and took it. Nobody really knows what happened to her or where she went. I imagine the shame kind of forced her to move. This is my story, and it's nice getting it off my chest. I'm a 28-year-old guy currently working as a volunteer at a pet rescue shelter. I've been working like this for about 2 years. I love this job. This happened about a year ago. It all began when a new girl started working at the shelter. I'll call this girl Gracie. Gracie is 21 years old and incredibly shy, or at least it seemed that way at first. During her first few weeks, she would only talk in one-word sentences, no matter what she was asked about. No matter how often the rest of us tried getting her involved in social stuff, she would decline. A few weeks in, she started making comments like, "I just don't like people," and "I just prefer to be left alone." People obliged and left her alone. When she had been working at the shelter for about 1.5 months, she started following around a few guys like a lost puppy, drooling when she thought nobody was watching her. I was one of those guys. Her behavior was outright creepy, as she was still not talking very much, just following people around, staring at them like a dog in heat. At one point, I went straight to her and told her I found her behavior very creepy. I told her she should be careful because some might interpret her behavior as sexual harassment. She just looked away. Stuff went down a few weeks later when I managed to stumble upon Gracie's Tumblr. She had submitted a picture of herself standing with one of the puppies from the shelter. She had added a lot of hashtags about our local shelter, apparently in an attempt to spread awareness. In curiosity, I went to her actual Tumblr, and man, it was just a Pandora's box of creepiness. Basically, Gracie's Tumblr could be split into 3 parts. One part was pictures of random people, most of which were at work, and all of which were obviously snapped without consent of the person in them. All of the pictures had stories attached about how the person in the picture was a bad person. Most of these stories were about how the person had been bullying Gracie, or making sexist or homophobic comments and acting like a generally shitty person. All of the last kind of stories ended with Gracie stepping in and telling the person to check their privilege, as if the stories were unbelievable enough on their own. The next part was a picture of a guys Gracie thought to be hot. Both real and fictional. In between the pictures were stories about these people mixed in various relationships. Gracie had even made up stories about these 2 guys at work being in a relationship. And she had countless pictures of them doing stuff like talking or caring for an animal or such, with notions of, "See, they're totally in love. Gays are so cute." Both of these guys were in healthy relationships at the time. The last part was Gracie either reblogging or submitting text about social justice, especially from the extremist parts of Tumblr. I found a post talking about how a guy at work had told her off just because she had been looking in his direction. The conclusion to the post was, "I don't see what his problem is anyways. Guys think about sex all the time. It's not like it's a violation when guys actually want it. They can't actually get sexually harassed because they would never actually object to sex." The post had been reblogged with various comments of, "Dumb cis scum," and so on. At first, I wasn't sure what to do about all of this. I knew something definitely had to be done about it, but didn't know what. In the end, I went to my boss and we had a talk. She told me this was probably just Gracie living a fantasy on the net, but acknowledged it had to stop. The 3 of us had a talk, and Gracie was utterly humiliated that somebody had found her Tumblr. She didn't outright apologize, but she did seem to accept it had to stop and understand what she was doing was borderline illegal. The next few weeks, Gracie became a shadow creeping around the shelter, somehow even more antisocial than she had been before. My boss only kept her around because she was free to work at whatever odd hour was needed. Her Tumblr seemingly got deleted, but I had a creeping feeling it wasn't the end of it. About 2 weeks later, I was checking out the accounts that had been friends with Gracie's account. Mainly, I wanted to find out how far Gracie's lies and stories had spread. Mostly, it was her social justice stuff and the gay stories about the guys at work people had been reblogging. Through all of this, I found out Gracie had a new Tumblr, one which was even creepier than the old one. The new Tumblr didn't have a lot of posts, not at all like the first one, but those it did have were even creepier than her old ones used to be. One of the first posts was an explanation of how she had been forced to shut down her old Tumblr, with some lies about how it was because she was supporting the LGBT community, and her boss thinking ill of that, because some cis scum felt threatened, in her words. The next couple of posts were either updates on the gay couple and stories about them or posts about this shitty dude at work. What made these posts really terrifying was that she made threats about killing me. She even wrote long paragraphs about how she would strangle me, poison me or stab me, and how great it would feel to kill off cis scum such as I. What really made my heart jump was when I found a picture of my house. A few similar posts had been made about some of our coworkers, but apparently it was mainly me she held a grudge towards. I went to my boss again, this time telling her I would get the police involved too, because this sort of behavior was just way too far out. Gracie was called in again and got an earful, but during the entire talk, it became obvious Gracie had no idea how her behavior was wrong. She told us it was just stuff inside her head, that she would never actually do it, but when asked why she had been uploading pictures of my home and why she had been stalking people and kept snapping pictures without them knowing, she just made up some bullcrap excuse about how it wasn't us on those pictures. I finally blew my fuse and told Gracie I would talk to the police because I was sure as hell not going to stand by as some creep was following me around with a camera. The police did get involved, and as part of the case, they confiscated Gracie's phone, her camera. Apparently, this led to another case of drug possession, and Gracie was later taken to jail. I don't know what happened to her then, but I'm hoping she's in a place where she can no longer upload bullshit on her blog. This happened in 2011. I just got out of a rough relationship a few months prior to this happening. My friends encouraged me to try dating again, so I caved and made a profile on the website Plenty of Fish. I was surprised with how many messages I'd received within the first few hours. Most were just people saying hi or asking to hook up, but I wasn't looking for that, so I ignored those messages. After about a week, a guy roughly an hour away from me messaged me. He was cute enough, so I messaged back. The conversation was pretty casual at first. He asked if I'd like to go for a coffee sometime. Not thinking anything of it, I said sure. This is when it got weird. He started to get pushy and asked when we could go grab a coffee. I told him I didn't have my own car, so I'd have to borrow my mom's car to meet up with him. He offered to come pick me up, but I wasn't comfortable with that idea. The next message made my blood run cold. It read, "I'm sure your hometown isn't that big. If I knocked on a few doors, somebody would be able to tell me where you lived." "Are you crazy?" I replied. "I'm sorry, but that's pretty creepy." This pissed him off. He messaged me multiple times after this. I said, "You know I have a gun, right? I could shoot you and make you disappear. Nobody would look for you. You're nothing but a slut. I could kill you and you're dirty. I'll throw you down a well, nobody would ever find you." I was really scared at this point, so I asked him to please leave me alone. He replied with the following, "I know where your hometown is. It's not a big town. I can find you." At this point, I'd had enough and I blocked him. I reported his account to Plenty of Fish and deleted my account. I was really on edge for the next few weeks after that. I was afraid he was actually going to come look for me. Over this summer, my fiancée, my stepdaughter, then 2 years old, and I went on a vacation to Presque Isle in Pennsylvania. We stayed there throughout the afternoon and decided to get dinner in a nearby town, Erie, Pennsylvania. We go there and see a water fountain that kids can play in. We think our kid would like that, so we get food and take her there. Now, it was kind of a sketchy area. There were a lot of people that were super ghetto, with face tattoos and looking pretty hot and stuff like that. But there were also kids, and it was still a little bit light out, like 6:30, 7 p.m.-ish. My fiancé and I sit down and watch our kid play for a bit. At some point, our kid wants me to run in the water with her, so I do. I kind of keep going back and forth between playing with her and keeping my fiance company. After playing with my kid for a while, I come back to my fiance. She looked kind of pale and said, "Go get the kid. We need to leave right now." I didn't know what was going on, but we went to get her, and as I was turning to go back and get her, I noticed a group of about 3 really weird guys staring intently at us. When I looked over, one of them stood up a little bit and was giving me a stare. I grab our kid and start following my fiance, who was booking it. As we were walking away, she told me that somebody was following us now. I look over and see the creepy looking shirtless dude getting in this old beige sedan behind us. My fiance explains to me that the same man kept approaching her whenever I would get up to run around with our kid. At first, he introduced himself and tried talking to her. She thought he was benign, but just trying to hit on her. When I came back, he apparently bolted. I sat with her for a couple of minutes and then went back to play with our kid. Apparently, as soon as I went, he returned. He asked her if she was married to me. She said that we were going to be hoping that it was the end of that. He went away before I came back to sit with her again. The third and final time I went to play with our kid, he apparently came back. He told her that she thought she was a beautiful lady and asked if that was her daughter, pointing to our kid. My fiance said yes, and the guy said that our kid was also a beautiful lady, and that his night was going to be made, whatever that means. Cue when I come in and we book it. We're walking back to our car, which is kind of far away. Erie in general was pretty abandoned outside of the park, and we noticed the car pulled out and start driving extremely slow in a street parallel to us. At this point, I don't think he knew we saw him. My fiance is freaking out, and I tell her to wait near the vestibule of a closed Starbucks, where we aren't in this guy's vision. We stayed there for about 5 minutes, and I was watching the roads, not seeing anything. We continue walking, but are still on high alert. I find my car parked outside of a McDonald's, and we are now power walking to it, holding our kiddo. I looked behind, and lo and behold, the same beige car going at 3 miles per hour or so, just barely inches out from the side street so I could see it. As my fiance and kid are getting in, I turn around, stand at the back of the car, and shoot this guy the death stare. After looking at his car for about 10 seconds solid, he peels out and speeds off past us, nearly hitting me. Not sure what this guy's problem was, but if you're in Erie, Pennsylvania, watch out for some scummy looking man that's about 6 feet tall, very wiry, possibly Hispanic, and driving a beige tan car. I assumed that he wasn't tailing us for any good reason. Afterwards, I bring up the 3 guys that were staring at me. My fiance said that the pervert following us was sitting with them when he wasn't coming over to her and saying creepy stuff. I have to apologize in advance. I'm not the most amazing storyteller. I'm going to try to write everything down as I remember it happening though. My brother is an avid Redditor and he told me I should post my story to the sub, so here we go. I used to date a guy named Norman back in high school. I'm 29 now and have a 9-year-old daughter, so this must have been 12 to 13 years ago roughly. I guess we were each other's first real love or relationship, if you will, and we even wore promise rings, which was a pretty big deal back then. We talked about getting married and what our life together would be like. Basically things people say or do when they've been together for a year as teenagers. As things go, we began to argue and fell into a cycle of breaking up and getting back together. I was immature and stupid, and I ended up getting together with another guy during one of our breakup periods. It became a messy love triangle situation, and Norman and I finished for good after I chose this other guy. Not my proudest moment, but I was 17 and stupid. Fast forward a few years, I made a Facebook account, and out of curiosity, one day I looked up Norman. We added each other on Facebook, and I messaged him apologizing for what happened between us. I was happily married by that time, and we just had my daughter. Norman was a good sport about it, and we remained amicable friends via social media. I really only ever talked to him to say happy birthday or randomly comment on his status. Another few years go by, and Norman gets into a relationship with a woman named Marissa. I was happy to see him moving on. My marriage didn't work out, but I was happy with my life and raising my daughter by myself. During Christmas one year, I found an old Polaroid picture of me and Norman at a cabin weekend we had taken together when we were dating. I messaged him telling him about it and recalled how much fun we had. He didn't reply. And this was before those scene stamps, and later I found out I was no longer on his friends list. A few months later, I got a message from Marissa. She basically said I was a whore and a slut and that she saw the message I had sent him months ago. She told me to never ever contact him again and that I needed to get over him. She went on to say how a charm bracelet that he gave me was nothing compared to what he buys her, and that I was a cheap buck that he had in high school. She said the silver promise rings were bullcrap, and that he had bought her a gorgeous gold engagement ring with several diamonds. Well then, I never responded. I got off Facebook not long afterwards for a short period of time before remaking an entirely new profile and adding only close friends and family. Over the next few years, I would get ads from people I didn't know to all of my social media. I knew it was her because the first account I mistakenly added began to send me abusive messages saying that I was a loose slut and an attention-hungry whore who would never find love. Afterwards, I never added anybody else I didn't personally know. I didn't know how she kept finding my other accounts. She tried to add me to Instagram and Twitter. She even somehow found out my phone number and tried to add me to WhatsApp. When Snapchat became a thing, I got an ad from a user who had one of my Facebook friends' names as their username and sent me snaps of unlimited, rude, and crude things in cursive handwriting on paper. I kept blocking her and maintaining no contact because honestly there was nothing else I felt I could do. This year I joined a dating app. I met a guy within the first week of being on it who I thought was amazing. His name was Nate, and he had a fair few pictures of himself. He was average looking, so it didn't raise any flags with me that this suspiciously model looking guy was trying to talk to me. He said he had an Android phone, so he couldn't FaceTime, but we could talk on the phone. It was definitely a man's voice. We texted a lot over the next few weeks, and things seemed to be going well enough to lead to a meetup. We scheduled a time and place. A week before he asked me about past relationships. I didn't think too much of it when he asked me about my first real relationship. He seemed keen on details and asked me if I still had feelings for my ex. I reassured him I didn't, but that I also didn't date him because I was the one who messed up and he was actually a really good guy. We talked a lot about that relationship, and then he said he was looking forward to meeting me. We had chosen to meet at an outdoor cafe because I didn't like the idea of meeting at my house without me actually knowing how this guy was. I was so excited. It was my first date in a long time. So imagine my confusion when I saw a woman spot me and smile and start walking over. I was too shocked to say anything when she sat down, and yes, it was Marissa. She looked so smug, and she said, "Hey babe," and kept smiling. She confessed it was her. At that point, I honestly just wanted to know why. What did I ever do to this chick to get all these reactions from her and for her to actually invest time in doing all of this to me? Basically, this is what she told me. Almost 6 years ago now, when she and Norman got together, he told her all about me and our first relationship. She went on his friends list and saw me there and went through all of my pictures and posts, trying to see what he saw in you. Then when I messaged him, she confronted him over why I had any pictures of him and me still, and why he needed to have me on Facebook. He deleted me and promised her to not talk to me again. She told me that she hated me and I was stupid, that I was a bad person who loves playing games with people's emotions, and that she wanted to give me a taste of it. She said that she made up accounts so she could keep an eye on me and make sure I wasn't going to be in the same city as her and Norman. I live right outside their city, by the way. She would walk by places I'd be at if I were to make sure he wasn't meeting up with her in secret. She knew where I worked through my LinkedIn. She said the guy who I spoke to on the phone as Nate was her friend who was in on it and wanted to see me go down as well. She said she originally planned to make me fall in love with Nate and then cheat on me, but she couldn't stand to wait too long. The most disturbing part was when it came to my daughter. This woman had actually become extremely fixated on my daughter. She was convinced that she shared some of Norman's features and became obsessed, thinking that I had a kid with whom I kept a secret from him. She told me to not even think about suddenly revealing it to him in some ploy to get back together with him and that she would be the only one to give him a baby. I was beyond horrified. It's not very exciting, but all I remember doing was getting up from the table and telling her to never contact me again. I got in my car and just sat there in silence for a bit. The first thing I did was call my daughter's school and alert the front desk of a possible situation where somebody who was neither I nor her father would try to pick her up. I called my brother afterwards and told him about what happened. He urged me to call the police. I did, but ended up getting the whole spiel about how if I don't have any documented proof it's her, or her saying any of these things, it couldn't help me out much. It's been 2 months. I haven't heard anything from her, and my brother thinks that maybe she got what she wanted by asserting herself, as Norman's one and only, and now she would leave me alone. Still, I have massive paranoia when it comes to what I post on social media and where she might be lurking next. I've told my family and close friends about the situation and warned them not to add any strange profiles or people they don't know. I also told my neighbors the situation and showed them a picture of her so they could call the police if they saw anybody like her around the house. I wouldn't put it past her to know my address and start peeping in our windows or worse. I used to work at Borders way back when. Though I had another job at the mall, something about being at the bookstore made me much more recognizable, I guess. I often had people approach me when I was on the street or ask me about the store's sales, etc. while I was at a drive-thru window. It was mostly harmless stuff, though I got some creeps on occasion. At the time, I had a dating profile up, but I had to take it down because I started getting weird messages from men saying they saw me at the grocery store or something and wanted to touch themselves. Just bizarre stuff. The killing blow that made me finally close it, however, came shortly before my 19th birthday. I was checking my account after work and I saw a message titled, "We've met," which immediately creeped me out. I clicked on it and it said, "Sort of," before proceeding to go into this very weird graphic depiction of this guy who was apparently so thrilled by my cashiering skills that I turned him on. This email was seriously like 3 pages long, talking about how sexually excited he was and all the things he could do to my young body. I was horrified to think that one of my customers had been looking at me like that, thinking those things. I clicked on his profile. No photo. It said he was 56 and single, but no other information was given. I needed to know what he looked like, which is the only reason I replied, and I imagine that was his game all along. I didn't respond to any of the stuff he said, but I asked him if he'd send me a photo. He told me that he couldn't put one up because he's sort of a public figure, but he told me he'd email it to me. It took him 2 days to get back to me. Those were 2 very long days. While I waited, I looked at my message history and discovered that this guy had actually written me many times. I'd ignore him because 1, no pictures, and 2, way out of the age group I was looking for. Out of morbid curiosity, I looked at the messages. All of them were filled with sexually graphic things he wanted to do to me. He talked about fantasies of using me with another man that he knew, acting out roleplay scenes, tying me up, etc. Some of the details were specific to me, which leads me to believe he wasn't just sending them to every young woman on the site. Meanwhile, this guy is older than my dad. I spent the next 2 days tensing around every older man who came in. I was afraid to be friendly to any of them, for fear that one of them would be this guy and he'd take it as a go-ahead to come at me. I was having a birthday celebration the day he finally got back to me. The moment I saw his name, I got a bad feeling in my gut. I couldn't immediately place it, but I knew there was something wrong with this person writing these things to me. I stared at it for a moment, positive I knew this guy, but my brain would not let it click. I texted my friend to confirm with her as it began to dawn on me. This man was my high school principal. I was horrified. I was still 18 at the time, which means that he must have been creeping on a bunch of us all along. I remember being alone with him in his office and it makes me feel queasy. Is he just perched and waiting for girls to graduate so he can legally pounce? I wrote him back and told him, "I don't know if you remember me, but you were my high school principal and I happen to know that you're married." He didn't reply and I thought that was the end of it. I was still super creeped out for a while after that though, just knowing how long he'd been thinking about me and sending me these graphic messages when he'd been an authority figure in my formative years. Almost a year passed without incident and he didn't come in when I was there. But one day I started ringing somebody up without getting a good look at his face. It was a friendly exchange, right up until I made eye contact. It was him again and he was grinning at me. I put his stuff in his bag and turned away from the register, but he stayed where he was. I pretended to organize some returns, but he just kept standing there silently, not moving or anything. I knew he was watching me, but I didn't want to look. The moment lasted far too long, so I finally grabbed my headset and asked the manager to come to the front of the store. He hurried out after that and I never saw him again. Edit. I was going to mention this before, but the post was already so long. Because this had been a common question though, it turned out he had recently retired, so he no longer worked with children. Regardless, I still contemplated putting the information out there, but I realized there wasn't a whole lot I could really do at that point. Technically, he wasn't committing any crimes, just describing kinky fantasies to a legal adult. I thought about it for a long time and discussed it with people in my life, including a parent who worked with the school, and it just didn't seem worth the risk. It was a smaller area and I didn't know what might happen to me. Now, I probably would have done something anyway, but I was a kid at the time. As for his wife, again, I thought about contacting her. My friend's mom knew her and I had email evidence. However, he only sent his photo through an identifiable account, and I learned from a friend's experience years prior that it was risky to get involved in marital affairs. I didn't know their situation and there was a chance his wife may have already suspected his infidelity, but remained in denial because she didn't want her marriage to end. In those situations, sometimes the woman will lash out at her husband's victim because she can't lash out at her husband. My mom and several other older women told me not to get involved too, so I didn't. Again, that might not have been the right move, but even today, I'm not sure if it was. To be clear, this was over a decade ago. I do still have the final email somewhere, but I'm not sure if I have the ones he sent me on the dating site. They may have just been connected to the account, possibly lost when I deleted it. I think I may have screenshotted them, but that was like 4 computers ago, so I can't be sure now. I no longer live in that area, and frankly, I feel like it's more likely to invite unwelcome attention onto me than onto him. He could be dead for now, all I know. This happened a few years ago with my friend June when we were maybe 17 or 18. I'm 23 now. We were out driving around late at night on country back roads. We were teenagers growing up in a rural area, so going for a drive was one of the main ways we passed the time. We were both into goth stuff and witchcraft at the time, so we pulled off the side of the road to walk around a small graveyard in the woods. It was impossible to see at night, but we'd gone there a few times the day before just to hang out. The whole area is heavily forested, but the path to the graveyard is short. It's right next to the road, just barely hidden in the woods. Anyways, we started slowly on the small loop that takes you around all the gravestones, using our flashlights to read the names and look at the carvings of the stones. I was very comforted by graveyards and the night at the time, so I was honestly very relaxed and amused about ghosts and death and whatnot as goth teenagers do. About halfway around the loop, at the furthest point from the car, June got my attention as she'd noticed a light in the woods. It looked far away, like it could have been a car on the road, so we turned away and kept walking. However, about 30 seconds later, she got my attention again, and the light was much closer and obviously quickly moving towards us, and then I heard the sound of someone crashing through the woods. It was obviously someone with a flashlight making a beeline toward us, and we backtracked and ran to the car. I unlocked it and climbed into the driver's seat, turning the car on as fast as I could, and right before the lights came on, this huge grisly-looking man, dressed head to toe in camouflage, carrying a huge crossbow and wearing a headlamp, busted out of the foliage and was coming right for the car. He has this manic look in his eyes that just made me want to escape this even more, and I reversed as quickly as I could and peeled out of there. We didn't stop driving for a while. Even though we never saw him following us after we drove off, we both couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Finally, I think we both got too tired to stay out any longer and we went back to our houses, but I still constantly think about how quickly he got to us. If we hadn't sprinted right when we did, he would have caught us as we were getting into the car. I literally slammed my door about a second before he came barreling out of the woods towards us. Plus, the fact that there are no houses nearby. This person was waiting in the woods in full hunting gear with a weapon. And we clearly weren't animals as we had a flashlight. And there was a no trespassing sign in sight. The whole area around this graveyard is state park. I go out into the woods and into weird places in the night a lot, and I've seen some stuff I would consider supernatural that really scared me. But none of those things ever truly made me afraid to go into the woods like he did. I still go out on my own, but I never let my guard down like I used to. So, this started on one of those meet new friends apps. I'm not just a huge loser, I swear. I moved to my current city during the pandemic and have a work from home position, so it just hasn't been the prime circumstances for a social life. I matched with this random girl that we'll call Annie. I can't remember if I saw her first or vice versa. Honestly, I was paying more attention to the profiles than the pictures, and she seemed okay. Spirituality came up somehow. I can't remember how this happened either, and to be fair, it could have been either of us. I've recently been more seriously following Norse paganism, but it wasn't something I was seeking to explore with other people. It's mostly a private thing. Not to mention my own beliefs are more metaphorical, but that doesn't mean I'm close to the experience entirely. So when she mentioned having an LGBTQ neurodivergent pagan femme coven, I was like, okay, wow, that's either very specific or very broad, but hey, why not? Maybe it'll be fun. So we agreed to meet first before I went to the event. One weird thing that stuck out in our text conversation was that her partner was in some bizarre Scientology rehab. At first, I assumed this was a place where one recovers from Scientology. But I did ask her if her partner was a Scientologist. I didn't get an answer. We only met for an hour to have coffee. I think more red flags would have popped up if we had more time, because the little things that went off on my radar were things that weren't that weird. Like they were explanations, or I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt, and my dumbass didn't ask again about the Scientology thing. I kept meaning to Google Scientology rehab, but kept forgetting to do it. I've since Googled it and can't find anything about a rehabilitation for ex-Scientologists, so I wish I'd done that sooner. There were, however, other things that stuck out. They're relatively benign out of context, but putting everything together in retrospect made me feel dumb. She wouldn't answer any direct questions about herself, and not for lack of asking. I'm the kind of person who is conscious of when the attention is all on me, so it made me uncomfortable, and I didn't learn anything about her really. Most of what she had said had to do with her spiritual awakening. Her spiritual awakening itself sounded weird as heck. She said that she had a realization that she was like a lighthouse that was drawing people toward their personal enlightenment. And, okay, I did think this was weird, but, like, she's from California. I don't know, maybe that's kind of normal. I just chalked it up to her personal beliefs being whatever they were. Reincarnation came up. Reincarnation is a big part of paganism, although Asatru additionally focuses on your ancestors. She told me she didn't think she had any past lives and was a new soul, which didn't make a lot of sense, but okay, whatever. Not my circus, not my monkeys. The vaguely supernatural element she placed on herself was strange, but I know a lot of people want to feel special. That didn't mean I had to believe it. At one point, I told her about this random woman I met at the pagan festival who tried to con me. She wanted to charge me so I could be under her wing or whatever. I don't need someone to protect or guide me, so I declined. As I was telling this story, I could tell Annie was conflicted. Like she wanted to agree but didn't. Finally, she said something blasé, like how it was only inappropriate because the student should choose the teacher. So I clarified that I did not want a teacher. Her response was very mirroring, and I'm not a moron. I was getting a weird sense that she wasn't being honest with me, that she was telling me things that I wanted to hear, and I told myself that she was probably just nervous. I have a strong personality. I'm very independent, so I can understand if somebody wouldn't want to go up against the things I said at our very first meeting. I know I'm just dumb at this point, but I didn't want to be paranoid. I don't trust people easily, and I know that, so I was trying to loosen up and be more chill. Yeah, that was a big mistake. So I go to this thing. Immediately, it's weird, guys. Immediately. The second I step foot in that house, I'm uncomfortable. It's filled with people and completely silent. Everybody's looking at me. I'm laughing and saying hi, and no one is like really responding. And here I am, awkwardly dropping my keys and phone, while everyone is just watching me. Eventually, I take a seat on this short couch because there's no room in the large circle. It's a very small living room, and there are like 20 people circled up. There's a cushion on the couch, so I sit on that. The leader starts talking, and as she's going on, I'm looking around at the people there. I was curious. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the leader trying to look at me. The girl sitting in front of me is partially blocking our view of each other, so the leader is like leaning over to try and meet my gaze. Finally, I felt awkward enough to like shift over so that I was leaning against the arm of the couch. Staying perched on a cushion was uncomfortable by that point, so I shifted off and spread out a bit to be more comfortable. The leader ended the speech with, "So, spread out, I guess," which was clearly directed at me. It was said with some humor though, so I wasn't sure what to make of it. Everybody introduces themselves and are their own unique brand of neurodivergent. I'm ADHD, but I guess I don't subscribe to labels beyond the requirement to stay medicated. I've been medicated since 2015, so this isn't a new diagnosis for me. That was the only question we got asked about ourselves beyond our name. The leader guides us through this meditation, and people are making these weird breathing sounds and hums. I get it. It's spiritual, right? Unfortunately, my ADHD ass can't focus to save my life, and it's impossible for me to follow the guided meditation. I do not understand. How can anyone with actual attention issues listen to past trills and deep noise breathing? So I'm sitting there with my eyes closed and barely paying attention, because I can't. But I do hear the leader say that we should think of anything we'd want to ask her or need from her, and that got my attention. What the heck did I need to ask her? Other than where the snacks were, because I paid $8 and don't see a single one. Once the meditation ended, Annie and the leader walked around to give us material for an activity. Annie gave me 2 long pieces of twine, and the leader gave me 2 sticks. As the leader was handing me the sticks, I asked her where the snacks were. She was like, in the kitchen on the table where the snacks tend to be. I'm a dry, sarcastic person, so I thought it was her brand of humor. I laughed and played along with, "Oh, alright, I think I'll find them." Literally, she was deadpan, unsmiling. And then walked away. So stupid me thought she just might be like that, but then I saw her laughing with the other girls and realized something was off. As the activity commenced, she went back over to Annie and started stroking her back, kissing her hair and giving me this creepy smile. Yeah, it was very weird. I was so uncomfortable I wanted to get up and go, but I couldn't. Why? Because of this damn activity. The activity was the last straw. They wanted us to think of something we wanted to discard that brought us pain. Then they wanted us to feel how bad that thing made us feel as we slowly twisted the piece of twine around the stick. That's stuff I would only ever do with my therapist. Obviously, people were emotionally melting down before long. I wasn't comfortable doing the activity for obvious reasons, so I sat there awkwardly with the sticks and the string in my lap. I was the only one not doing it, and it was obvious. But because I wasn't doing it, I had the opportunity to watch Annie and the leader, and it was chilling. Annie was doing some weird pyramid thing above her head with her arms. There were a lot of references to her being a lighthouse or some sort of guiding figure throughout the meeting. She was the only one who wasn't doing the ritual. Other than the leader, they were both running it. Suddenly, it occurred to me, as it probably did to y'all already, that Annie had just been using this app just to bring people into their group. She was the only person who seemed to know everyone, yet no one there knew each other. Even the name of the group now made sense. They weren't being specific, they were casting a wide net. And I had this big realization in a handful of seconds. It made my stomach turn. So yeah, I was done, but I couldn't get up, because people were sharing their experiences and stuff, pouring their hearts out. This was the most messed up part of it, in my opinion. There's no reason to do a releasing ceremony that forces people to feel their trauma, especially at the very first meeting. It's also inherently manipulative because it requires people to let their guard down. Then they can quote-unquote save the day by showing people how to release the very same pain they just inflicted. But that isn't the fault of people there, so I didn't want to disrespect them. Like people were crying on top of my shoes that I left by the door. I had to wait for the best time to ask somebody to pass them to me. Finally, I got up and told everyone I had to go to the car, then took off. I texted Annie and told her I wouldn't be back and that I hope she found her people. Just make sure you're not her people. Be really careful of any spiritual ceremony or practice that demands vulnerability from you, especially directed by people who don't know you beyond a name. Annie, let's not meet under any circumstances, please. And if y'all ever hear the term neurodivinity, run. If ADHD made me divine, then I'd be on my 94th incarnation by now. Hey folks, I'm kind of new and this is the first story I've submitted here, so let's get started. I must clarify that this didn't happen only to me, but to my uncle too. This was after the Christmas Eve party, when everybody went home. I decided to stay because my cousin and I were watching a movie. My uncle, who used to walk his dogs into the woods next to a park, went out to take them out. Before this, my aunt told him not to do that because it was too dark out there. It was around 4 or 5 a.m. He didn't care much and he went off anyway. My aunt was still worried, so I went along with them. Once there, anything wrong seemed to happen, everything was quiet. My uncle and his dogs were having a relaxing walk, and I wasn't really paying attention to the surroundings when suddenly the dogs went still. This wasn't that strange. They always stopped on their way to stare and bark at other animals they noticed, like rats or birds, even insects or other dogs. However, this time was different. When the dogs got still, my uncle and I noticed something that was going wrong. The dogs weren't angry or curious, they were actually kind of nervous, anxious, or afraid. One of the dogs, the largest one, was growling and shaking. As my uncle started to get worried about the situation, we heard it. People in the woods. We didn't see how many because of the darkness, but they were saying something. We all gather here, by the blood of incomprehensible, we incomprehensible, the in thy incomprehensible, etc. As my uncle and I heard that, he yelled for his dogs to follow him out of the woods. As we all left, he turned his head back and he only saw a slight movement of branches and shrubs, perhaps because these people were trying to hide. After all that happened, he hasn't walked his dogs near these woods, nor when it gets dark. So, to the strangers in the woods, let's not meet. I haven't posted an experience in some years, but this one happened recently. I was behind the scenes at the restaurant I was working at, waiting to clock in for my shift. That's when I first noticed her. Starboat Girl. This chick loves that gothic kids movie about the blue-haired girl and the button-eyed doll. The clothing associated with the marketing of the movie is always a dark blue bow with silver stars. Now, when I'm not at work in our dress code, I'm usually goth or close to it. I enjoy looking more like a rock star than wearing just jeans. And yes, I own jeans too. I just prefer to wear darker clothes, so I immediately noticed this girl because of her bow. I remember that movie, even though I'm an adult. So I make a mental note that, maybe this chick is alternative too, and I might get along well with her. Fast forward to a few weeks later, now everyone else avoids this girl. I notice, but figure people are being mean. I admit she is kind of weird, but weird never scared me, so when she starts to say hi, I politely say hi back. I pick up a shift on a day I don't normally work, and she's there waiting to clock in. After exchanging greetings, she starts to engage and we talk a little bit. I like to joke a bit at work, so I say something kind of edgy and she laughs. And I clock in and that was it. I didn't notice until later, but I never used to work with her. I mean, barely. We work in different areas of the restaurant, so it was whatever it was, and I don't really think anything about it until one day. I'm at my lunch in the break room, which is quite a walk from our restaurant to get to, and more like a bungalow that is attached behind the property. I am sitting at one of 6 tables. Each table has 2 chairs. Starbo sits right across from me. I look up for my chips and dip, and there is no one else in there but her and me. She asks, "Can I have a chip? I forgot to bring a snack for my break." At first I'm thinking I don't like to share my own food with people I don't know. I'm just not raised that way, so my instinct is to say no, but she flashes up the dough eyes and I crumble. "Yeah, sure," I reply. She scoots my dip out of my hands and under her chin and proceeds to grab fist after fistful of my chips and chow down. It's like a movie scene. It actually made me sick. I'll spare you the details, but this chick double dips, slops, and belches. Yeah, no thank you. My food is done. I am not eating after that. I make up an excuse to head back to our location. I'm pretty upset, but at the end of the day, it's my fault. I mean, I said she could have some. I feel like she guilted me into it. Never again, I tell myself. A week later, click, clock in for my shift. Guess who is standing behind me? Starboat Girl. She doesn't normally work today. I don't normally get anxious, but she's making me feel that way. I avoid saying hi and duck out to my area to work. On my break, here she comes. She is walking behind me and says something about spending break together, and I say, "No, you go on. I gotta use the toilet." And I fast walk towards the bathroom. At lunch, I'm not so lucky. Plops down at my table. The room is virtually empty. Maybe one guy half asleep in the back. I'm on my phone scrolling and eating my TV dinner. She asks if I am having a good day. At first, I completely ignore her. Then she gets louder. I say something bland like, "Just hanging in there." I was in the middle of my meal, and my box from it was still sitting on the table. I'm quiet, ignoring her, playing on my phone or pretending to. Starbo starts picking up my trash and reading it. I'm taken aback. "What are you doing?" I say. She slowly says in a casual kind of way, "Just curious, what you're eating." I am so upset. I want to do something, but something she can't get me fired for. I start talking about really macabre and Debbie Downer stuff, anything I can think of. I tell her my opinions on canceled forensic shows and Armageddon, tragic accidents, and everything I could do to put a bitter taste in her mouth. I figure this girl is too weird for my blood and too creepy even for me to have a friendship with. I'm overly excited about my newfound rise to turn this girl off that as I'm talking, I finish my food and a noodle goes down the wrong pipe. Great. Now I'm choking. I'm freaking choking. This girl might be the last person I ever see. I can't believe it. She turns to me and says chillingly, her eyes turning dark, "You're going to die from that." More determined now to live than my thinly little gothic mind ever was, I tell myself, "Find water," and I will myself over to the water cooler halfway across the break room. Luckily, we had paper cups, which sometimes ran out. I chug water and cough and gasp, and finally, and obviously because I'm typing this, I survived. But I am fuming angry at Starbo. This chick wouldn't even get me water. I get it. I was turning her off, but this whole thing started because she was stalking me. I grab my stuff and go to my supervisor and report it. My supervisor is so lax. Says the company can't do anything. That she is within her rights to be around me. I keep avoiding her. The last time I saw her, she came up behind me before she clocked in and stabbed me with her pointer finger in my back. Smiled at me when I turned around to see who it was, and ran to go clock into her area for her shift. Now she works the same shifts as I do. I think she changed her availability to be near me. I also think she has been getting breaks and lunches close to mine, so she can come hunt me down in her breaks. I really don't know what to do besides report her or make up an excuse again to leave if she finds me. Back in 2008, I was a student planning to go to university and needed some extracurricular stuff I could put on my entry applications. As most UK students know, one of the best to have on there is the Duke of Edinburgh Award. As part of this award, you have to embark on an orienteering expedition, basically a long trek through woodland and rural villages following nothing but a map and a compass. No GPS allowed. It is a teamwork experience, and you camp and overcome hurdles together. Anyways, I was out of shape at the time, and so my uncle volunteered to take me out of the middle of nowhere to get some idea of what orienteering was like. We didn't stay out overnight like what I would have to during the real thing, but we hiked maybe 10 miles through woods in a small village in pretty abysmal weather. By the end of the journey, we were soaked to the bone and pretty miserable, looking forward to getting back to the car and heading home. For the last part of the journey, we were on a dirt trail heading uphill with bushes and trees on either side. We were marching onward in silence at this point when all of a sudden there was a rustling in the foliage to our left. From behind a large bush stepped an old man in a black suit with a red bow tie and dress shoes. He looked late 70s, early 80s, very pale with liver spots dotting his face, and a gray/white comb-over. I was instantly weirded out. Who dresses like that to go into the woods? The instant thought seeing a guy his age out there in those clothes in those weather conditions was, this guy has lost his marbles. There was something else that took me an extra moment to notice, though. That absolutely puzzled me. The guy was bone dry, didn't even have mud on his shoes. We stopped in our tracks and just stared at the man for a moment, who appeared to be as frozen and shocked at seeing us. My uncle made the first move, taking a step towards him, asking him if he was okay. The old man continued to stare for a moment, not moving even a twitch, then became suddenly very animated. It was like he suddenly snapped out of a trance. He started flailing his arms wildly, saying something awful had happened, that a good friend of his needed help. He began walking backwards into the woods, motioning for us to follow him, which we did. We started off at a brisk walk and then escalated to running as we struggled to keep up with the man. After about a minute, he disappeared ahead of us, but we could hear him, so we continued to follow the noise until we reached a huge slope. We stopped at the edge and looked down to see the old man standing at the bottom, motioning us still, pleading with us to follow him. I remember looking down, and the slope was probably at a 40-degree angle, spanned for perhaps 50 feet or more, and was slick with mud. It looked like an accident waiting to happen, especially given there were no shrubs or roots to hold on to anything. I remember looking down at the old man on the other side of the slope and wondering, how the heck did he cross that so quickly and so cleanly? I mean, at that distance, it is hard to see fine detail clearly, but I swear he still did not appear to be wet or muddy at all. I and my uncle looked at each other, and I saw that he was getting as weirded out as I was. Despite my feelings, I made a step toward the edge and was going to try and make my way down when my uncle grabbed me firmly by the arm and pulled me back. Under his breath, he said to me, "Something's wrong here." We took a few steps back from the edge at this point, and the old man at the bottom started getting irate. He began pleading with us again to come down the slope, telling us that he needed our help. His friend was in major trouble. My uncle shouted down to the old man that he would head back to our car and call emergency services for him, that professional help would be on its way soon, that they would have all the tools to help him. The old man suddenly got furious. He began jumping up and down, demanding that we come to the slope right now or we would regret it. His voice had changed drastically. He was practically growling his words, his hands bunched up into fists, pounding his knees like an angry toddler throwing a tantrum. I've never seen a grown adult fly into such a rage in my life. His eyes looked like they were on the verge of bursting out of their sockets. His skin had gone from pale to red in almost an instant. We began to hurriedly make our way back the way we came, his demands and threats getting less audible as we got closer to the trail. Once on the trail, we practically power marched the remaining quarter mile or so to the car. All the while my uncle was on the phone to the emergency services, explaining to them that there was a possibly mentally ill old man wandering the trail. We were ordered to get to our car and await the police so we could show them where we had encountered him. About an hour later, we met 4 officers, 2 of whom had dogs with them and packs of supplies like first aid, emergency blankets, and stuff. We led them to the exact spot and then pointed the 2 officers with dogs in the direction he led us through the bushes. The search lasted all weekend, but there was no trace of the old man. Officers said the only trail they could pick up had been mine and my uncle's. They didn't find any footprints or anything belonging to the old man we encountered. One of my weirdest experiences to date. I had to think about it, but I believe this happened in the 6th grade. It's hard for me to believe that this took place 20 years ago. One thing I don't remember is what our science project was exactly. All I know is that I got partnered up with this kid in my class named Brian. He seemed like a chill kid at school. He was chubby, quiet, and kind of shy even. When I went to his house to work on our project for the first time, he was apparently much more comfortable and seemed to be very outgoing. He made jokes and laughed a lot more than usual. Kept saying stuff to his mom in Spanish, and then they would both laugh at me. But I never thought it was really that mean, and I would laugh along, even though I didn't know what they were saying. Usually right afterwards, he would tell me what they had supposedly said. At one point, we were in his room, and he asked me to go ask his mom for lines of paper. I told him I didn't speak Spanish and he should go ask her, but he said he would just tell me how to say it. I don't remember exactly, but he told me to say something like it. So I went and asked his mom. I knew something was off right away just by the way she looked at me, like I had said something crazy. She grabbed my hand and walked me to the bathroom like I was a special little boy. Once we were in the bathroom, she pointed at the toilet paper with that confused look still on her face as if to say, Where the heck else would it be? I was confused and could only speak to her in English while she spoke to me in Spanish, and we didn't understand each other. Soon we heard Brian having a hilarious laughing fit from the other room. Laughing so hard like he thought it was the funniest thing ever, but I was pretty sure it was only kind of funny. I wasn't worried though, and I laughed it off. Haha, you got me. Eventually, he became really excited to show me something. He told me he'd be right back, and then he ran out of his room. He was gone for a minute or so and then returned, telling me to follow him. He was so sure that I was going to love whatever he was about to show me, so I was excited too. Couldn't wait. We get outside and he goes to this little shed and pulls out a lawnmower. He tells me to follow him. He started the mower, began walking, and then gestured with his hand again for me to follow him. As we walked, we rounded a corner and there on the ground was a net full of frogs. There were maybe 20 or more frogs in there. I didn't have time to stop him. Right before it happened, we looked at each other. Him looking at me to make sure I was looking, and me looking at him in pure confusion. He pulled back on the mower, raising the blades, and then let the weight of the spinning blades fall down on the writhing pile of frogs. The mower bogged down just for a split second, and there was a sickening wet crunching sound, followed by chunks being spit everywhere as he raised the blades back up. He raised the blades and let them fall on the pile of frogs 4 or 5 times. All the while he was staring at my face and laughing maniacally at my horrified reaction. He released the bar and the mower went silent as he crumpled to the ground and began rolling around on the grass laughing. A couple of frogs escaped without getting blunted. A few more frantically scattered away from the mower, missing limbs. I awkwardly laughed with him and played along like nothing bad had just happened. I never get disgusted to the point of throwing up, and it's hard to disgust me at all. But from that point, I definitely knew there was something wrong with Brian. And until now, I've never told anyone. I wouldn't say that I was afraid. It was just that I didn't think it was a good idea to tell anybody what had happened. Not his mom and not my friends. Not my parents, not my brother or sister or best friend. I didn't tell anyone anything about it, and Brian never did anything like that again or mentioned it. It was the weirdest thing. They say it's the quiet ones you've got to watch out for. I haven't seen him since 6th grade ended, but sometimes I wonder just what kind of person he turned out to be. I've never been a girl who has scared easily. I routinely watch crime shows, horror movies, and stuff. However, a night in March 2005 changed all of that for me. I was attending college for music in 2005 and had recently seen one of my favorite violinists. Inspired, I had asked a pianist friend to accompany me while I played a piece. Looking back, it wasn't smart on our part to go at night to the college's music practice rooms, which are nearly soundproof and separated from the rest of the building. I figured since it was across the street from the campus police headquarters, we would probably be okay. Was I ever wrong? My friend and I are in the practice room for about 15 minutes when she looks at me and says, "Don't freak out, but there's a guy with a mask behind you." Now, this is college. There are plenty of stupid people doing stupid stuff all of the time. When I turned around, I realized this was something much more sinister. There, crouched on the other side of the practice room's glass door, is a thin guy about 5'7", maybe 5'8", wearing a thin blonde curly wig. The Groucho Marx glasses / nose combo thing, a hideous shirt, just a personal judgment, and the creepiest smile ever. That's right, no pants or underwear, just his small penis out. When I turn around, he waves and enters this tiny practice room. My friend and I try to remain calm because we honestly don't know what to do. Then this guy tries to strike up small talk with us and mentions he heard me talking about my favorite violinist. Apparently, he's been standing outside the practice room the entire time. He knows our names, where I had gone that day, where our hometown is, my guy problems at the time, etc. As soon as possible, my friend and I booked it out of there. He was blocking the door most of the time, so we were really scared. As we are leaving, he says, "Let's do it again," with my name. Of course, we go to the campus police department immediately, and they think it's all pretty funny. The next day, I'm sitting in choir when the dean comes in and says, "Hey, a friend of your cousin stopped by today. He said he wanted to give you some CDs of my favorite violinist. He asked for the girl who played violin with your first name, so I assumed it was you." I tell him what happened and he's furious because the campus security didn't do anything. That's when the stalking began. He soon was clever enough not to go by the music office again, but my dorm neighbors would tell me a guy was looking for me to give me some kind of gift. One time a stack of CDs from various violinists was sitting in my assigned seat for choir. Another time they were outside my door. All the while the campus security is doing nothing. Some people even suggested that I should enjoy the attention. Things died down when I finally moved off campus and stopped altogether, when I moved away from the college town. Until 2 years ago when I moved back to the same town. The first week back I received a direct message on Twitter saying, "Glad you're back. I've missed you. Let's get together and listen to." Insert violinist name here. I reported it to the police, who haven't caught the person to my knowledge. All they knew is the address came from somewhere other than my city. Part of me is still waiting for the knock on the door, or a present left at my work or home. In Pennsylvania, right near the border into Delaware, there is a narrow, eerie place with deformed trees, closed-off paths, and lots of legends. It is formerly known as Devil's Road, the main attraction in a place called Satansville, which encompasses the whole of dark twists, isolated roads, and unsettling encounters. It was written about in the book Weird Pennsylvania, which highlights the creepy places of the state. According to many rumors, there is a cult house hidden in the woods surrounding the road, and any trespassers on the road, especially those who stop, will be chased out with a black or white SUV or truck. For years, I had read about the place and heard spine-chilling stories until I couldn't stop thinking about seeing it for myself. My friend Matt and I spent almost every Friday night at the mall together, as teenagers do. As expected, it can get pretty boring pretty fast, especially with no money to actually have a motive to shop around for anything other than disappointment. Visiting Satansville without telling our parents became another weekly tradition of sorts after he told me about his experience a month before our first visit. He had told me that when he visited with his guy friends, his phone service completely cut out, leaving them without Google Maps in a potentially dangerous, unclear area that was already scarcely mapped. Soon after, he told me, a black truck came off of a dirt road and followed closely behind them until they found the main road. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me to be hooked. Not too much happened on our first few trips. We would see other cars rarely, as it's a hidden road that is no longer marked due to excessive theft of the street sign. Occasionally, the cars would be black in color, and we would get a rush of adrenaline. It was fun, but not exactly terrifying, until one night. We finished up at the mall around 6, and we left with enough time to circle around once or twice in daylight, and the remainder of the time in the dark. It was about a 40-minute drive to Satansville from the mall, and I was tingling with excitement. According to the legends, cars that visit frequently are more likely to have experiences at this place, and this would be our third time visiting in the last few weeks. Instead of Matt and I going alone this time, we brought our friend Lola, who was very outgoing and would likely have a sense of humor in a situation that we'd be too scared to continue in normally. We drove down the highway and finally made the first turn, leading to the seclusion. Matt and I had pinpointed several areas where we thought the cult house may be, but stopping on the road is illegal, so we never had a real chance to explore. At least, that's the logical reason I gave in lieu of us being major cowards. The ambience immediately changed as we entered Satansville, and the cool night air flooded through the cracked windows. In the first few turns, other people aren't entirely a rare sight. A few trucks pulling out of driveways they like. However, the turn onto Devil's Road never loses its wow factor. The trees on both sides of the narrow road lean away from the forest aggressively, not just a tilt, but completely bending in the trunk away from things we could only imagine. We were approaching the first major bend in the road, and a car was coming up towards us. It was a tight squeeze, nearly impossible for two opposing vehicles to pass. The presence of a car alone was enough to cause a twinge in my gut. Matt was focused on squeezing by while turning, and Lola was too busy cracking jokes to see what I saw, but I have never forgotten the face since then. I looked over to the white Jeep to my left, and the window was incredibly tinted but half down, looking back at me straight into my eyes like he had been looking at me long before I looked to him. He was a young man, maybe 25, with long blonde hair, a deathly pale face, and horribly thin fingers on the steering wheel. He was not at all focused on driving, as his eyes pierced me, and this is the worst part. His neck was turned completely towards me while the rest of his body was completely straight forward. This may not sound creepy, but it was not normal to bend that way. He said something, but I couldn't hear him over Lola and Matt, laughing at our antics. I couldn't break his gaze. I was stuck staring at him until finally Matt passed the bend and he was gone. I kept checking the rear view windows, terrified with a feeling I'd never quite felt before. When I could no longer see the Jeep, though it felt as though he could still see me, I quietly asked my friends if they'd seen him. Neither of them had looked at him nor felt anything unusual. I was pretty unsettled, yet excited to see what else would happen. We turned off Devil's Road, but were still in Satansville, preparing to loop back around, when we passed a little shack that always housed 2 black trucks. There was no sign of any other drivers, and we wanted to stir the pot a little bit. We stopped for a few moments and honked the horn and flashed our blinkers, and then kept driving. We also blasted Old Town Road for some reason, because that was our peak of comedy at the time. We looped back around, and were back on Devil's Road when Matt stopped mid-sentence to adjust his mirror. In the darkening distance was a black truck. We giggled with nervous excitement and kept driving. It was exciting, but it kept a reasonable distance, and I think we all kind of assumed it was a coincidence. That is, until we turned off Devil's Road once more and saw that there were no trucks parked by the shack anymore. We lost the truck when we turned on the main road to circle back around again. We circled around 2 more times, nervous but skeptical, and not much happened other than an ass-riding white SUV that kept blinking its headlights. Not going to lie, that freaked us out. And the return of 1 truck to the shack. This is where it gets really intense. On our 5th loop, we were all very tense. The aura had changed to heavy, and it was completely dark at this point. Things had started to feel more ominous. Probably from the slightly less passive actions taken towards us by whoever was there. We went down the bends, peering nervously into the woods. Some trees were marked with 666 and upside-down crosses. Marks of other, more ballsy teenagers, and there was a distant light in the woods. Courtesy of who knows what. As we turned off Devil's Road, but still in the heart of Satansville, headlights appeared behind us. It was impossible to tell what kind of car it was, as it was pitch black and we had just turned the first major bend. Moments later, the truck appeared behind us, speeding. We were going about 25 probably, and the truck must have floored it to catch up, and it drove uncomfortably close to us. I was the one to see it first. It was a black truck, windows tinted and driver unknown. We drove on for a minute, freaking out and turning completely behind us like creepy Jeep guy, but more normally. Soon, a second truck joined behind it at a fork in the road, and they revved their engines as if in communication. The truck sped up, nearly crashing into us, and we were forced to speed up. This continued through many intense twists and turns where our speed reached up to 70 at the maximum. They flashed their lights, kept speeding up and getting closer. At this point, we were losing our stuff. They were definitely either going to run us off the road or catch us and do who knows what to us. They had these weird red lights on the tops of their trucks, and the light was reflecting off every window in our tiny Honda. Just above a small hill, the main road was visible and relief flooded us. We panicked again, though when we realized we would have to wait for traffic to slow before we could turn, and they would definitely catch us. With nothing else to do, we stopped and glanced behind us. The trucks were gone. We all expected a sudden ambush, but made the turn onto the highway and started home, talking about what the heck just happened. Came to the conclusion that the trucks had probably turned onto a dirt road, only visible to those who know it's there, and that they were chasing us away from their activities. Like the rumors say, what were they doing exactly? We have no idea, and we have no intention of finding out, as we hadn't been back since, and I still can't get the face and presence of the man in the Jeep out my head, and this was over a year ago now. I was a teenager in the 90s, and on this particular night, had found myself stuck downtown. It was around midnight when I finally found a semi-well-lit bus stop. I looked at the bus schedule and realized I may have missed the last bus of the night, unless it was late. I decided to wait on the bench. Moments later, a tall man walked up and sat right next to me. There was plenty of space to sit elsewhere for him, but he huddled up nice and close. He was wearing all black, including a black leather jacket. He started making smooth conversation with me, and I finally looked over at him. He was very tan and had shiny wavy black hair and orange eyes, like bright hazel orange, snake-looking eyes, which contrasted with his dark features and clothes. He really looked like the devil in person to me. He took off his leather jacket and laid it across my lap to keep me warm. I took it off and handed it back to him and said no thanks. He kept draping it back on my lap. I looked around for other people and only saw a passed out homeless person sleeping on the bench. He was trying to coerce me into getting a ride with him because it's so late and he was worried about me. And my bus isn't coming, I'm not safe. I said, no thanks, my bus should be here any minute. In my mind, I didn't know if the bus would be here at all. The streets were dead and dark, and I was scared to leave the only spot that was well lit. After what seemed like an eternity, my bus finally came. It was the most beautiful bus I'd ever seen. I quickly got up and said, my bus is here. He sneered at the bus and said under his breath, you got lucky. I got on the bus and saw out the window him walking to his car in a dark parking lot across the street from where the stop was. He stood next to his car waving at me to come to him, as if that would change my mind. It obviously did not. I was a wild teen that partied a lot and would stay downtown all hours of the night and thought I was an invincible. But after that incident, I never stayed out that late again, especially alone. I really did get lucky and had no intention of pushing it again. I went to school in New Orleans from 2010 to 2012, and I encountered the scariest man I've ever known while attending. My friend from high school and I both lived there at the time. We met up to smoke a small joint on the outskirts of a nearby park. She was struggling heavily with money, for both tuition and everything else, and I was smoking her out for a pick-me-up. While smoking, a man emerged from a white house across the street from the park, one of the nice Garden District homes. He carried his bike over his shoulder and was headed straight for us. We quickly put out our joint when we saw his eyes locked on us, and we initiated friendly conversation. He introduced himself as Ty. He was tan with piercing blue eyes, probably in his late 30s, and seemed pretty athletic. We asked if the nice house was his, and he said he was staying with his friends. He ran back and retrieved 2 beers for us, both unopened, so we accepted. This was a poor choice, but he was insistent. We were already pretty high, and we were a little afraid that he would screw us over if we said no. He pulled out a ring of cards while telling us how he was a model, refusing to tell us what exactly he'd done in the past. The cards all seemed pretty worn and old, but he insisted that they were his press passes. He noticed immediately that I was asking some overly specific questions, and it was pretty uncomfortable, while my friend, much more trusting, was enthralled. He latched onto her, telling her that he was doing a shoot in New Orleans for the Saints, working for ESPN. She would be paid, he said, and saw her light up upon hearing this. Her phone was off, so she told me to give him my number to communicate. I was pretty mad at this point. He kept making backhanded comments intended to make me feel like the outsider for questioning him. It's not for everyone. This is how you make it in this world with a pretty face. And things of that nature. Putting on a show of fawning over my friend. Sociopaths tend to single people out like that, I learned. I soon heard from him on a daily basis. He would ask how his little lady was doing, my friend. Ask for her Facebook and ask for her class schedule, and I told him that I doubted she would be okay with that. She would have been, but she was playing a dangerous game, so I tried to intercept his advances. He found me on Facebook soon enough, though my information was not linked to my number, and I was receiving messages constantly asking for my friend. I thought that if I blocked him, he would continue to hunt me down in crazier ways, or tell somebody about the weed. Young and stupid. So I allowed the barrage of messages. I refused to help him and made my friends aware that he was starting to scare me. I was leaving town with my friend a few months later for Christmas, and told him the week before we actually left that we were both gone indefinitely, as his messages got more and more aggressive as time went on. He freaked out, but it seemed like he would leave me alone in the end. However, every time I went to the park, which was daily in my last week because I was smoking a ton of pot after finals, just keeping it real here, I would see him on his bike, circling the track around the park. I didn't think much of it, nor did I think he could see me because I was with a group and away from the track, and he never acknowledged anyone being there. The day before we actually left, I received several blurry images of the original friend and me lying in the grass on the different days we came together, which wasn't every time I was there. It was obvious that we were smoking pot, so again, young and foolish, we didn't go to the cops. When I got back to my dorm on the same day, placed on the sidewalk by the back entrance I always used, which was rarely trafficked, was an ESPN press pass with the name Tyler Durden, piercing blue eyes staring up at me. It was like it had been laid right in the center of the walkway. That was probably the most frightening moment of my life, and I packed up and stayed with a friend until my flight out. I received phone calls from numbers I didn't have throughout Christmas, making my life miserable. Every sound in my house I feared would be him, finding me at the address with my name attached to it. He was livid, texting in all caps from various numbers that I was a little liar, that I was just a stoner and I was never model material and I was jealous of my smoking friends, implying that he knew of more than just one of my friends. That liars get raped and he would destroy my pothead life, and he'd go into really weirdly worded babbling rants that scared the ever-loving shit out of me. I was scared to tell anyone in my life. I was the good kid who had gotten herself into the stupidest situation. I just hoped he would move on. A week before I was supposed to go back to school, he just stopped. From daily rampages and rants to nothing. I was so relieved until in February I checked my email to find a crime alert warning students of a serial rapist going by Tyler Durden, who lured women to his home, gave them alcohol and assaulted them. His real name is Dean Kelly. A has-been model from an Aerosmith video, baiting, stalking, and assaulting underage girls at schools in Chicago, Texas, and New Orleans. He keeps making it out of jail on bail and contacting his victims, pretending to be other victims who want to talk. Thankfully, I'm not one of them. Screw this guy. I still live in fear years later. When I was a kid, I lived in a pretty normal, semi-rural suburb of a major US city. When this started in 1997, I was 6. My brother was 3, and my half-sister was 18. My sister made the dean's list at her university her first 2 semesters, so we went out to dinner to celebrate. The 5 of us, along with my grandparents, went to a seafood restaurant chain in a nearby city. It was connected to a mall, and our table was by a window that looked out into the hallway of the mall. Shortly after ordering, I looked up from my coloring to see a woman staring in the window at us. She had long, stringy, mousy-colored hair, big glasses, and a longish olive green coat. She made me nervous from the get-go. Next time I looked up, she was no longer in the hallway of the mall, but in the restaurant. She was standing at the host stand, ignoring the host's questions about how many people she would be dining with. She was still staring at our table. Eventually, she requested to be seated at the bar, where she could still see our table. I finally pointed out to my grandmother that somebody was staring at us. She pointed it out to the waiter, and he said that unfortunately there wasn't much that he could do unless she actually harassed us. So we finished our meal uneasily, all of us aware that this woman was staring. After dinner, we walked around the mall. The woman followed us into American Eagle, which at the time wasn't so teenager-oriented, and that could have been coincidental. But afterwards, she followed us into Limited Too, a clothing store for young girls. She didn't look at any of the clothing, just my mom, brother, sister, and me. My mom told an employee that the woman had been following us and she left the store. She sat on a bench outside and watched us while we purchased clothing for me. She followed us the rest of the evening, never going into the stores after us, just throughout the mall. My dad, who had been pretty nonchalant about the issue at the beginning, finally was getting creeped out and we left. A few weeks later, I saw this same woman in a car outside of my summer daycare. I began to cry and told the aide that the woman had followed us around the mall. The aide went up to the woman and asked her to leave or she would call the cops. We had on occasion had other creeps watch the daycare's playground and the cops had to be called. Then she came to our church. It was almost September at this point, with these events starting in June. She attended one service, sitting on the opposite side of the congregation area from where we were. There were 3 sections of pews, one straight out from the pulpit and stage, and 2 on the sides at a 45-degree angle from the stage. My family was on one side and she was on the other. We informed the pastor, and he targeted her in a very pastorally way, inviting her to new member classes, asking how she found out about the church, and what drew her to this church, etc. She apparently was fairly unresponsive and never showed up again. We didn't see her again for a few years, at least not in any way that was as obvious as it was in 1997. My sister swears she saw the woman on her university's campus a few times her sophomore year, 1997 to 1998. My mom and dad thought they saw her at a local music festival in the summer of 1999. I thought she was in a museum while on a school field trip in 1999. Started crying and was basically told I was imagining things by my teacher. In 2001, she showed up again. Every year, the Girl Scouts had a big slumber party at my elementary school. All of the Brownie and Junior troops had dinner, played games, had events, worked on badges, and had a big sleepover in the gym. The elementary school I went to had these gates that closed off sections of the school, I assume for security reasons. The offices, gym, cafeteria, and health room were all on one end of the L-shaped building. The rest of the school was closed off to us by a locked gate. I walked out of the gym and looked down the hallway into the locked part, and a few classrooms down there was a janitor. It wasn't just a random after-hours janitor though, it was the woman. I bursted into tears and ran and hid in the bathroom until my troop leader called my mom. She picked me up and took me home. On Monday morning, my mom inquired about the woman with the school. It turns out that she had been hired as an after-hours janitor by the district about a year prior. She had worked at a different school for about a year before transferring to my elementary school, a few weeks back before I saw her. My mom told the school about the incidents in the late 1990s, and the school seemed skeptical. I ended up getting cast in the school play for a few weeks later, and would be at school after hours, so same time as this woman. She was often at the gate, staring into the gym, watching our rehearsals. She must have started at 4 p.m. since she was never actually in the gym, only on the other side of the gate, and that's when they shut the gates. I told the director that the woman was watching, having realized that people thought the stalking aspect of this was a figment of my imagination. The director did tell the school they saw the woman on the security camera watching us, rather than doing her job, and fired her. They informed my mom that the woman was fired as well. Once again, it all stopped in any obvious ways. I was driving with my dad one day and saw her in a car in 2002. My brother saw her at the park that his Boy Scout troop had an event in once. My sister saw her at the restaurant she worked at in 2002, as well, and refused to serve her, getting a coworker to do so. She said the woman never stopped staring at her. It stopped again until 2008. I was 18 and was at Culver's, a Wisconsin-based fast food and custard chain, with my boyfriend. We were at a table eating when the woman walked in. He visibly froze, just as I did. Apparently, his family had the same issue with the woman that we did. There were a few instances of her actually stalking them. His dad owned a restaurant for a time, and she would come in and ask people about the owner's kids, but would refuse to talk to the owner or would go silent if he approached. For them, this started in 2000 when he was 8-ish and his sisters were 5 and 1. Like my family, they saw the woman in the background for years, including at the elementary school that we both went to. This means that at least 2 families independently complained about this woman, and the school did nothing about it for months, even though she had allegations of stalking at least 4 students. We promptly left the restaurant. She didn't notice us. presumably because we were 16 and 18, pretty grown up with their crazy hair and piercings and skinny jeans. But she'd followed both of our families around, just watching from the background for years. I can't help but wonder how many other families she followed like that too. I'll never know what this man's intentions were, but I am thankful I listened to my gut anyways, even if it took me a hot minute to smarten up. At the time that this happened, I didn't think much of it until looking back on it from the perspective of an adult more mature and wiser. Now, as I revisit the memory of this encounter, I am convinced something more sinister was at play, but I'll never know for sure. I was 17, and as teenagers tend to be, a lot less cautious than a young girl of my age ought to be, in a new country completely foreign to her. I was on vacation with my family to escape the cold winter weather up north. My parents were very liberal about giving me the breathing room I desired, and I wasted no opportunity to use that to my advantage, as much as I was afforded. It was a family resort and nobody was all that concerned about anything happening. We all had our vacation blinders on, so to speak. Every night after the sun went down, I liked to wander off to the pool to swim and soak in the hot tub, while my parents stayed in their rooms. When you're basking in the lap of luxury at a high-end resort, you don't think about the potential for danger. In hindsight, I suppose this is why tourists are considered ideal targets for predatory activity. Being on vacation made me more sociable and, additionally, more trusting than I normally would be. I admit that the false security that came from being within the illusory security of this protected resort caused me to lower my guard substantially. The fact that I'd already been going to and from the pool area by myself every night, with no incident thus far, only heightened my cavalier nonchalance. While my parents gave me the breathing room to enjoy my independence, I was here to make friends and have a good time. I didn't care about much else. So, just like any other night during my stay, I was lounging in the hot tub, chattering amongst the guests, all of my worries completely forgotten for the moment. I was getting a lot of attention, mainly because it was apparent that I was Canadian, and all the guests amongst me were apparently fascinated by this. I was barraged with questions, some of which I could not decipher whether they were genuine or trolling. Yes, we do have heat and electricity up north. I kid you not, I was actually asked this. Amongst this group of people, I was particularly invested in this conversation I was having with a much older man, who came off as nothing but warm and friendly. He had claimed he too was on vacation with his family, but they were nowhere to be seen. In fact, he, not including me of course, was the only one who seemed to not know anyone there. Everybody else was with their families. I figured that was normal enough. However, because I too was vacationing with my family, and they were nowhere in sight either. What strikes me as odd, however, is how he seemed to be engaging only me in conversation and ignoring everybody else. He was nearly 3 times my age. Doesn't help matters. As the night progressed, people began retreating to their rooms, leaving just me, this man and a few others. It was around this time that he shared with me what room he was staying at before asking, innocently, where I was staying. Foolishly told him, but only the sectional area. Although he had asked which room specifically, I had enough sense to not divulge that much. Things didn't take a particularly unsettling turn until I began to notice how eerily quiet things had become. There was still some people around, but it was just me and him in the hot tub now. I took this as my cue to start heading back. Bidding him goodbye, I got up to leave, but he instantly stopped me, insisted that he walk me back to my room, as it's not safe for a pretty little thing like me to be wandering around the resort by myself at this late hour of the night. I took this with concern akin to a protective uncle, but waved off the supposed hospitality, insisting I would be alright. He became more persistent, switching from concerned guardian to fearmongerer. He told me how bad things happen to young girls like me without an escort. As he droned on about the dangers that might surely befall me as a young female on vacation, with no parents around to guard me, a small defenseless young girl, I felt the first wave of unease wash over me. I shook it off and smiled warmly, telling him thank you, but that I would manage fine on my own. He seemed to deflate as his expression became more exasperated. At least let me walk you part of the way there until I know you're safe. This puzzled me. If there were predators lurking, how would I be any safer walking from the halfway point than from where I was now, besides it being a shorter trek? Nevertheless, this show of concern was beginning to wear me down. He had gotten me thinking about how dark it was now, and the vulnerable position I was in. He was right, kind of. I practically had a target on my back. Okay. I nodded after a moment of hesitation. I was young and naive and thought it to be an advantage to have somebody bigger and stronger walk with me. I knew I was incredibly foolish and a sheltered teenager, with far too much faith in humanity as a whole. Very unlike the cynical and distrustful woman I am now who always follows her gut. I also, as annoyingly typically as this sounds, did not want to be rude. Fortunately, I have since grown out of my people-pleasing complex and will not hesitate to say no when I feel weird at the first sign of a red flag, but I had yet to develop this quality then. I hesitantly relented. At the moment, my fear of coming off as rude to an adult overrode that of any subconscious or otherwise concern I had for my safety. His eyes lit up and he nodded approvingly. Good. Let's get going then. It's late and your parents will worry. I ignored the twisting in my gut and rose from the hot tub, shivering from the sudden exposure of the cold air. Suddenly feeling too exposed, I hastily fastened my towel around myself, padded towards the lockers. At this point, I was just determined to get back to safety and warmth of my hotel room. It was only as I was getting closer to leaving that I began to get this sinking feeling in my stomach that something about this whole night just wasn't right. My suspicions were further affirmed as I took note of my escort following me. The lockers were outside and the women's changing room was to the left of them. I was going to retrieve my clothes from the locker, change in the locker room, and then go. With this complete stranger who I didn't know at all. I noticed he was standing a little too closely now, and I instinctively shrunk away from him. This definitely wasn't right, but it wasn't until I was shakily pulling my top on over my soaked bikini top, having already decided I would skip the locker room, which regrettably accented my womanly curves a little bit more than I was comfortable with at the moment, and which he seemed to notice as well, that I decided I could not wander off with this strange man that I hardly knew. Any last bit of false security had waned away the moment I felt his eyes on me, watching me dress, his eyes clearly appraising my body. I shivered again, this time not from the cold. As I pulled on the rest of my clothes, I had already made my decision. You know, I really appreciate you offering to walk me back, but I think I'll manage after all. Thank you, though. He grew solemnly quiet, which stirred a growing sense of malaise within me as I began to feel more and more validated in my decision to not go off with this man. Are you sure? He pressured. I would hate for anything to happen to you. I nodded more insistently and forced a smile. Nah, it's alright. I'll be fine, thanks. Okay, he said quietly as I practically started running for the exit. While still in earshot behind me, I heard him say, You be careful now. You never know who might be out there. As soon as I was out of sight, I began bolting and was stopped in my tracks, instantly by the second wave of impending dread to hit me that night. I decided against walking back on foot and headed towards the on-resort shuttle instead. On the way, on 2 separate occasions within the space of no more than 10 minutes, 2 older men in their 50s made a pass at me, and at the shuttle stop, a group of men in a car offered to give me a ride, but I ended up making it back to safety from the shuttle without any further incident. Later, I wrote it off as paranoia and convinced myself that he really was just a hospital older man with a young girl's best interest at heart. But now that I know from personal experience how the men that seem the nicest with seemingly good intentions can often be the worst predators, I'm convinced I made the right decision that night. So this happened a few months ago. My best friend P and I had just gotten out of school. We decided to get ice cream after school, and before we know it, it's 6 p.m. We leave the ice cream shop, which happens to be right next to the liquor store. Small city. We notice this shady guy standing outside the store, and we try to brush it off, but there's just something not right about him. A woman leaves the liquor store and she's dressed nicely in a dress and heels. She starts walking and before we know it, the guy starts following her. My friend and I get concerned, so we decide to tail him a little bit to make sure he doesn't have any bad intentions. Things escalate when we realize that he's filming this woman and she has no idea. It's disgusting. He's following her and has his phone out trying to get a better video of what's under her skirt. P and I look at each other and have a mutual understanding. We know we have to do something, so we take a deep breath and somehow manage to put ourselves between the woman and the man. We hear him curse, but we don't dare turn around. We are spread apart, making sure there's no way he can get her on film. Mind you, we're both 5'1", 17-year-old girls. Our hearts are racing, but we don't move away until the woman safely enters a restaurant, which is about 2 blocks away. She's in the restaurant, but this guy does not want to give up. He's waiting outside for her. He's lingering and even tries to peer inside through a window. P and I know we have to tell the woman what's going on, just in case he tries something. So we step inside this fancy restaurant and spot the woman on a date with her boyfriend. Tap her on the shoulder and I fill her in. She's shocked that he followed her for 2 blocks and that she had no idea. I let her know that he's waiting outside and give her his description, just in case he follows her anywhere else. She thanks us profusely and even gives us a hug. P and I leave the restaurant feeling relieved because we both know that we cannot live with ourselves if something were to happen to her. I'm a 22-year-old female and come from the US, but am currently living in Germany for a work study. I am traveling alone, but I am fluent in German and I've always been fairly confident in my ability to live alone and defend myself, considering I stand at about 5'11" and carry 3 different forms of self-defense on me at all times. I've been here for a little over a month and I absolutely love everything about it, besides this experience of course. This happened roughly 3 weeks ago. After exploring my semi-large home city in Germany for a few weeks, I wanted to check out a nearby country. I've always been jealous of how Europeans can travel. Countries like Americans can travel from state to state, and my dad generously offered to pay for my travels while I'm living here. So I wanted to take advantage of that and experience a different culture. After doing lots of research, I decided upon the Netherlands. I've always been curious about Dutch culture, and I was very excited to do some more exploring, even if just for a weekend. I chose a small city in the south of the Netherlands, so I only traveled about 4.5 hours to get there. I had some lovely Dutch food and got to experience the Saturday market in the city center, which was filled with local goods. Now for the juicy part. On my last day in the Netherlands, I decided to check out a local Dutch coffee shop. Most of you probably know, but some Dutch coffee shops sell weed for recreational use and have areas where you can smoke and talk to people. Since I've never been to anything like this before, I was super excited and nervous. I smoke relatively frequently back home, so I wasn't going into this completely blind though. When I walked in, I had to register for an account, and the staff took my picture and passport and gave me an account number. I was a little uneasy about this, considering I didn't want my passport and a coffee club account to go hands in hand, but I've heard that several coffee shops do this, so I wasn't super worried. I then went to the counter and bought the weakest strain they had, White Widow I think, which is definitely not considered weak in the US. Also, it was like 5 for half a gram, so that was pretty damn fantastic. I didn't want to bring the bud across borders because I didn't want to risk getting torn in half by the German police, so I decided I'd find someone to smoke with and grab a train afterwards. It was only about 1:30 p.m. as I made my way to the chill zone, a hazy room filled with foreigners and locals, all ripping bongs and dragging blunts. Amongst quite a few 20-something-year-old men, I see 2 girls sitting alone at a table for 4, and I ask if I can join. They happily oblige and we start chatting. They introduced themselves as Alex and Jen. Both of them were Germans, and when I mentioned that I'm from the US, they got super excited, started gushing about how awesome California must be, to which I've never even been. Not even after a minute that I'm talking to Alex and Jen, Some lanky, freaky looking boy looks over from a different table and says, "Oh, you're from the US? We were just talking about how we wish we could afford to travel there." Immediately after saying this, he sits down across from me, despite the fact that nobody invited him to. Looks-wise, this guy appeared to be anywhere between 25 and 30, relatively scraggly with big hazed-over brown eyes, shaggy brown hair, and a very large mouth, which was always slightly ajar. Though he was slightly unkempt, he seemed relatively normal, despite inviting himself to pop a squat with us. This lurky boy starts asking us normal questions. Where we are from, where we work, how do you like the Netherlands, and stuff. The way he spoke was slightly slurred though, as if he had been drinking, but I couldn't smell alcohol on him, and he didn't seem drunk. He was consistently hard to understand, with an accent that was possibly Dutch. For a moment, I thought he might have a mental disability, so I didn't want to be rude to him and say I couldn't understand him. It also occurred to me that he might just be attempting to flirt and failing miserably, so I didn't really see him as a threat. I mostly nodded at what he said or threw in a yeah for sure, here or there, while Alex and Jen were relatively quiet. Something about him was off-putting to me. I just couldn't figure out what it was. After a few minutes of barely coherent conversation, Alex asks this guy if he can roll us a joint since none of us know how to. He says yes and offers to grind our bud. We give him the go-ahead and he suddenly takes all of it and leaves the chill zone to grind it at the bar. This is where I started to get concerned. Tons of people in the chill zone had grinders right in front of them, and there was no reason for him to leave to grind our weed. I began to worry he might put something in it. Alex and Jen both admit that it freaks them out too, and I decide to keep an eye on him through the glass door. Though he had his back to us, I'm closely watching him when he turns around and gives me this wide-toothy smile, almost like he was laughing. I instantly got the chills. He continued to stare directly at me, smiling, as he spent 10 minutes grinding our bud. This guy wanders back in and hands each of us our small bags of bud and then grabs a paper to start rolling. I am not shitting you when I say that he took 30 minutes to roll one loose, horrible joint. His hands were shaking the entire time, almost violently. I started to wonder if he was on something else. The joint immediately falls apart and he asks Alex, who was sitting directly next to him, to lick it and fix it. He's smiling and staring intently at her as she's about to lick it, and she says, "You really don't have to watch me do it, you know." He responds again with some incoherent jibber-jabber as I turn to the girls sitting behind me and ask if they could roll a joint for me. They do so in less than a few minutes. The crappy joint falls apart about 3 more times, and we decide to just smoke the one that the girls rolled, as we all wanted this guy to get the heck away from us at this point. I come up with a half-assed plan as we light it, and I say, "Hey, we appreciate you helping us, but these are my friends that I haven't seen since the last time I was in Germany, and we just really want to catch up and have some girl time. Seems nice enough." He responded with, "Well, you guys can talk with me right here. I don't have to leave." Alex immediately repeats the same thing I said, phrased a bit differently, and he says, "I'm standing here. You can pretend you're alone and just talk with me here." At this point, alarm bells are starting to go off. Stu isn't leaving, and I can't think of anything to say to make him go. Jen has been quiet almost the whole time, staring at the table, but Alex is starting to realize that we really need to do something. Alex says to him, "Please, we don't want to be rude. We just haven't seen each other in so long, and we really want to catch up one-on-one." He aggressively shoots back with, "How did you all meet then? Where did you meet? In what city? Why are all of your friends?" And then directed at me, "Why were you in Germany, and where were you?" Dang. Now I need a real story, or at least one convincing enough to shoo him away. Say something along the lines of, "I was visiting this big city in Germany to find an apartment for my upcoming work study, and I met them in a pub. Started talking, realized we had a lot in common, and decided to stay in touch since I knew I wouldn't have a lot of friends when I moved here." Sounds legit. This guy nods and seems convinced enough. Alex immediately follows with, So can you please go back to your friends so we can talk? He says yet again, I don't need to leave for you all to talk. He then says we should start fresh and asks me and only me what my name is, while extending a shaking hand. Suddenly, every story I've read on here is rushing back to me, and I realize all the things I've done wrong. I told him where I work, live, where I'm from. Man, this isn't good. My name is my last saving grace. I blurt out a fake name. Trisha. He repeats my name, but doesn't tell me his. Now I've reached my limit. We tried being polite, but to no avail. We've spent over an hour dealing with this creepy dude, and we've all had enough of it. I look him dead in the eyes and sternly say, You're making us uncomfortable. Please leave us alone. He leans in until he's only a few inches from my face, his eyes almost quivering, as he says in a quiet, low tone, I know people at your work, people that are above you. You really don't want to mess with me, because I could ruin your life. As he says this, it's as though the slurring in his voice vanishes. I feel the blood draining from my face and my head starts tingling. I almost feel like I'm about to burst into tears or throw up. Maybe both. I grab my bag and say, I'm going to leave. You're seriously making us feel weird and I really don't want to talk to you anymore. And then the final blood-curdling comment from him. I think we'll be on the same train. Now that I know where you live, I think it's time for me to go too. I rush outside in a panic, borderline hyperventilating as Alex and Jen follow suit. We simultaneously say, What the heck, and hurry away from the coffee shop. We end up exchanging numbers and going our separate ways. Now for a slightly happier ending. After I sprinted to the train station, I realized that I had left my pre-marked bag at the coffee shop. I honestly hesitated as I really didn't want to run into this guy again, but I really wanted my useless goodies, so I ran back. I stood outside, briefly explained to the security guard what happened and why I left so quickly, and he said, We saw what happened and we kicked him out. So sorry for that. He's not allowed back here again and handed me my bag. I honestly believe that without Alex and Jen there, things would have gone very differently. I think this dude had some seriously messed up intentions, and the only thing stopping him was the fact that we were all together. I came across this subreddit a few days ago and thought I'd share my experience. This happened to me back in 2005, right after I graduated from uni. I live in a small town near the outskirts of London. It's not creepy or out of the way or anything, but it can get quite deserted at night. The night in question, I and a bunch of mates were going to all get together and go down to Fabric in central London. I was getting ready to leave the house when my girlfriend Sarah called with a bit of a problem, prompting me to tell my friends that they should go on without me, and I'll meet them there. I hopped on the bus and headed to hers. A few hours later, I'd helped her sort through her crisis and was thinking I'd better make a move on and head to the club. I asked if she wanted to come. Several times she insisted that she felt better and wanted to stay at home. Knowing better than to test her resolve, I left it at that and called a minicab. I was waiting for the cab at the front of the driveway when Sarah joined me for the wait. We were kissing when the car drove up. This was my first sign that something was wrong. We didn't hear him pull up because he was driving really slowly with the headlights off. The only reason he grabbed our attention was because he turned on his bright lights at us. It was an old cream-colored Mercedes station wagon. I ignored whatever apprehension I had because I thought I just had an overactive imagination. Okay, so he pulled up quietly. So what? Knowing what I do now, I'm so happy Sarah never agreed to come with me. I got in the cab and told a guy who was in his mid-40s that I wanted to head to Fabric in central London. He just nodded his head while looking into his driver's side wing mirror. I said, "Did you hear me, mate?" He nods again, this time also letting a yes slip out. "That's quite a fare," he said, all the while staring at the window. That's when I realized what he was staring at in his mirror. Sarah walking back up to the driveway. I was about to react when she got to the front door, but the cabbie beat me to it, turning and saying, "Can't have the little lady going on unescorted now, can we?" All manner of deviance out there. This threw me a bit as his whole behavior was off, but I also knew that's what I would have done had it been the other way around, and maybe this guy had kids himself. I decided to just talk to him and break the ice, and after about 5 minutes I felt at ease as we slipped into a familiar conversation. Football and women. It was all okay until he started telling me about his ex and best friends, how they had been hooking up behind his back, about how he kicked the ever-living shit out of his friend for it. Then he started fixating on his ex, saying how all women were whores and liars and were only out for themselves, that men are only there to pay off their debts and wants. He even tried to justify a time when he kicked the shit out of her, saying that men can't be excused for their actions if appropriately provoked. Then it got even weirder. He started talking to me about men, trans men, how he liked that they were the best of both worlds, that they were something he could fuck, but that they were also wired like men and not out to get you. Those she men are tighter than a twisted screw. I like it when they bleed a little on my you-know-what. Though some ladies are mighty fine, like that ass of yours. He turned to stare at me through the mirror, almost testing my reaction. I'm man enough to say that I was freaking the heck out by this point, not only at the conversation, but at the fact that the mobile phone I'd forgotten to charge had died halfway through its rant. Not one to show my fear, I asked him to stop off at an ATM so I could get cash out to pay him at the end of the journey. He agrees, and for a moment I feel like it's all going to be over in a second when he says that before he does that, he needs to stop to take a piss. That's even better, I thought. I can sneak out when he's peeing and bolt off. He turned off the main road and went through a random residential area before we finally found ourselves going down a dirt road and heading towards the woods. Mate, where the heck are we going? You can't take a pee anywhere. He replied, somewhere along the lines that it was safer in the woods. That's when I noticed it. This particular car had no unlock feature in the back, and a very quiet slow tug on the door handle revealed that the child lock was on. I was trapped. He stopped the car near the edge of the woods and turned and asked if I wanted to join him. I declined and said that I was in a hurry and asked him to hurry himself. This seemed to anger him and he slammed the door and vanished. I waited about 1 minute and tried to climb out the driver's side, but it was locked too, and I was scared that my movement had alerted the cabbie just outside. Having tried and failed to restart my phone, I looked around to see if he'd left a phone or some kind of device that I could communicate with, but nothing. After nearly 10 minutes had gone by, I worked myself up to smashing the windows, figuring that this was in no way a normal situation and that abnormal measures could be taken. Just as I was getting into position, I heard a loud crash. It sounded like a massive branch had just hit the leaves below. I froze, not moving a muscle, not even my lungs. I wanted to be able to hear everything just at that moment. As my ears slowly tuned in, I began to hear two very distinct sounds, but both in intervals. The first was a rustling sound, but it wasn't the wind. It sounded more like birds flying through the trees all at once. The second was a squelching slam. The slam only occurred 3 times, whereas the rustling was quite often. Then silence again. I decided not to wait any longer. My imagination was going wild as to what those sounds were, and I just wanted to get away as fast as my legs could carry me. I used to be on the track team. I leaned back and thrust my legs out as hard as I could and kicked the backseat window through. It shattered and I wasted no time in shimmying through the broken window and outside. That's when it happened. My eyes focused in the dark and I began to see that the ground was littered all around me with clothes. Children's clothes, and the odd toy. I was so busy looking around that I didn't notice him walk straight up to me from behind and grab me by the nape. He was obviously way stronger than me. Where are you going, friend? I still need to take you down Central. I noticed his shirt was off. He was sweating profusely and was covered in dirt. And in his hands he had a knife. A full-on kitchen knife, and there was something on it. I said, "What the heck, man? What the heck are you doing?" He replied something to the effect that he had some foul traps out in the woods and was checking on them for game. He offered to show me, recognizing that if I went with him, it would probably be the last choice I make. I twisted my body as much as I could and punched him square in the face. And I ran as fast as I could. He yelled after me, "See you soon." I ignored him and kept running. Even though we had driven quite far, at least 5 or 6 miles, I still legged it all the way back and straight to the cops and told them everything I remembered. They said they could go and check it out and sent me home in a squad car. The next morning, I called Sarah and went over right away to check on her. I still wasn't over the way the creepy cabbie had been staring at her, and since he had picked me up from hers, he knew where she lived. I told her the whole story. When I was done, she just stared at me in disbelief, not sure what to say, and hugged me. At that point, the police rang and I went outside to take the call. They told me that they went to check the specific area I mentioned, finding none of the clothes or toys I said I had seen. Neither was there any sign of foul traps or a knife. They did mention finding a few pieces of cut-up rope, but with nothing to go on, they just insinuated I was having a laugh at their expense. I then called the minicab company, figuring I could at least lodge a complaint against the wacko. The idea that this could have provoked him didn't enter my head at the time. They said they had no record of a car picking me up that night. One had been sent, but by the time it arrived, nobody was waiting. This creeped me out all over again. How had he found me then? Was it random? Was I chosen? Could he have been listening in to their private car radio network or something? I left Sarah's and headed back to mine, and she was going to join me after helping her mom do some chores, and I wanted to go chill for a while. I should mention at this point that Sarah and I are now happily married, going on 8 years, and that all is well. However, that day, after I got home from hers and took a shower, I wandered off to the window. What I saw sent a chill down my spine, and still does whenever I think about it. I saw it, that cream-colored Mercedes station wagon, and the crazy cabbie staring at me with such a cold, empty look on his face, until he slowly smiled and drove off. He told me I'd see him again. He wanted me to see him, wanted me to know that he could find me when he wanted. I still don't understand how he followed me or what his intentions were, and I've never told Sarah about this last incident. About a year later, I took out a loan and moved me and Sarah. We were engaged at that point, to another part of the country, and my parents followed soon after. Over the years, I've pondered what he was going to do, where he wanted to lead me, what the noises were, and how he had found me when he must have stopped to clean up the spot in the woods, but most of all, why he even picked me up that night. I suppose I should be happy it was me and not some other poor victim who might not have reacted as I did, but just in case, crazy cabbie, let's not meet. This happened some years back when I was in my last year of schooling. I was on a bus on the way to school when I happened to look up and met eyes with this guy. It happened by chance, so I quickly averted my eyes and disembarked the bus. From then on, I would have frequent chance encounters with him. My course happened to be on the same floor as another course, but on different sections of the building with the elevators in the middle. I would see him everywhere, in the corridors, at the elevator, etc. It weirded me out because he would attempt to say hi and smile at me. I didn't know him and have never seen him ever, so I would ignore him. Turns out he was studying at the course opposite mine. I chalked it up to coincidence, but still felt extremely uncomfortable. Told my friends about it, and they told me that the guy had some extremely disturbing violent tendencies, and had maybe even stalked other female students. Understandably, I freaked the heck out. The climax came one morning when I went to my classroom, which was really a project room for the final year students. I arrived late as always and went about setting up my station. The room is supposed to be locked and only accessible by a key card, but we keep the door propped open. All the desks are shielded with tall partitions in. Mine was shielded from the windows. Suddenly, the weird guy came into my classroom and went towards my table. He didn't even belong in this section of the building. Also, how did he know exactly where I sat if my desk was shielded from view? He saw me and I saw him, and I hurriedly attempted to feign sleep in hopes of chasing him away. He approached my table with a shoebox in his hands and asked why I was on the table and if I wasn't feeling well. My friend awkwardly told him that we were working. My friends were in a corner watching a variety show and laughing, obviously not working. He said he had something to give me. I stayed silent and continued pretending to be asleep. This lasted until he awkwardly went away. Later on, as I related this to my friends from the other course, they told me that he was extremely protective about the box and was extremely threatening to people in his class. Went something along the lines of, "If you look, I'll kill you." Problem was, nobody expressed interest in the box and the threat was unprovoked, so they got curious and peeked into the box to find that it contained dead flowers. How would he feel the need to pick dead flowers and gift them to me in a shoebox? Felt extremely unsafe and uncomfortable and insisted my friends accompany me everywhere until it felt safe enough. The strange guy also never appeared again. This happened a few months ago. The context required it. At this point in time, I had just picked my mental health back up after an extremely traumatic non-consensual episode. You can guess what, and was still struggling with chronic inability to say no to people. I'm a 21-year-old gay trans man, and while I never had trouble passing, I'm still seen as very pretty and young looking. So I was at a young people's event at my place of worship, which is completely accepting of all sorts of new people, by the way. It was a lovely evening. I met a lot of great people, got a bit tipsy and had a great time. That is, until around 12:45 to 1 a.m. when things were starting to wind up. I went upstairs and met a man, looked approximately in his late 30s, called Tobias. Tobias was quite forward, complimenting my appearance, being familiar, asking about my sexuality, so I guessed that he was interested, but I didn't feel the same way. My place of worship has always been a safe place for me, so I assumed if I didn't flirt back, he would get the message. Shortly after, I went downstairs to put something in the bin and he followed me. When we were alone, he kissed me. I pulled away and told him, "Sorry, I'm not available." He said, "Don't worry, neither am I," and gestured to his wedding ring. I laughed it off, turned, and walked back upstairs, and as we walked, Tobias told me, "I can't believe I just did that. Nothing happened. That didn't just happen." I nodded and thought that was that. The evening was getting late. I decided to get home. I offered to walk a friend of mine to the station, and when she left to go to the bathroom, he asked where I was going. I said firmly, "I'm going to walk my friend to the station, and then I'm going home." She returned, and as we left, he decided to come along with us. I asked where he was headed. He said, "Oh, I'll go to the station for you." I reiterated that I was going straight home from that point. Along the way, my friend wanted to get another drink and hang out, and I agreed. We were chatting and all seemed friendly, but I was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with Tobias's behavior. He was constantly complimenting me, telling me I was amazing, special, and not like anyone he'd ever met. He even kept touching me, putting his hands on my neck and down the back of my skirt, still trying to kiss me. FYI, this is a tactic called love bombing, I think, and it is a big ol' red flag. He commented on some hickeys I had. Who was that? Whoever it was. You think they're better than me? Really better than me? You let a boy do that to you? I told him that it was someone I had known for a long time and reminded him that I wasn't single. He had kissed me around 4 times up to this point, and when he did, I would pull away, try and put distance between us, move my head so he wouldn't, laugh awkwardly, and say, "We are in a shop. Please don't. I'm not what you're looking for. You don't know me," etc. This man straight up tried to make out with me 1 meter away from some poor shopkeeper serving us. Squeezed my waist and commented on how skinny and small I was. Asked me how old I was and commented, "Wow, you look so young." He asked me if I was attracted to him and I shrugged, shook my head and said, "Sorry, I'm very into the person I'm with and I can't even look at anyone else when I have someone." At this point, I should have told him to screw off. In fact, I should have said that a long time before this. But when it's actually happening, it's surprisingly difficult to get a bearing on when you can start being rude. Which is exactly what people who behave like this rely on. A vulnerable person's fear of making a scene. Or else they actually believe that this behavior means the person wants to be persuaded. We all decided to sit on a bench as all the pubs were shut. Sat on the end and my friend was next to me. Tobias whined that I wasn't sitting next to him. My friend asked why that mattered and he said, "Oh, because I want him to." Never mind, I'm being too much. I'm going too far. I I tried to steer the conversation away from him flirting, but he kept standing and walking to where I was sitting to kiss me, crouching by me and putting his hands on my knees. He didn't want to tell us how old he was because he was afraid I wouldn't like him, but did eventually confess he was 37. In an attempt to stop him being interested in me, I revealed that I was transgender, and he put his hand up my shirt saying, "Wow, you really think I would judge you for that? You have no idea who I am. I see you." Side note, what is this, the Avatar? I would never care. I would still do everything with you. He meant sexually, by the way. I wiggled away as far as I was able and said something along the lines of, "Well, thank you, but I'm not interested." My friend had somehow misread the situation as me enjoying this behavior, probably because I'm a bloke. I texted another friend to call me so that I could get 5 minutes away from the situation, walked up the street, explained everything and made a plan, which was a really good idea, talking out loud about it. I finally registered that this wasn't right, that I was totally in the right to be uncomfortable and wanted to get the heck out. I returned and told everyone that I was going home. The second I came back, he tried to kiss me and told me he was worried, and then tried to come looking for me. I moved my head so he couldn't and told him, "Please don't, I'm going home." I texted the friend I was with help, and she immediately started saying that we were going home. He should go home too, and she and I were leaving together now. He asked me, "What's changed? You've come back different. Who are you talking to? What's going on?" I told him, "I'm uncomfortable and I'm going home now." He said, "What are you talking about? Have I made you uncomfortable?" "Yes, I'm going home now." To this point, I can definitely see that my lack of rudeness and conflict avoidance tactics had actually made the situation much worse and given him the impression that I could be persuaded to do whatever he wanted, or somehow I'd let him on. So now that I've been absolutely crystal clear, he should back off, right? "Wrong," he said. "Wow, who are you talking to? What's happened? Whoever it is, don't throw this away. I know we had a connection. You're special." Said, "I only met you this evening. You made me feel uncomfortable, and you should ask before you kiss people." Wow, I can't believe this. You're trying to turn this around on me. "I know you're drunk, it's fine. I just want to go home now." "Oh, I'm completely sober." "I'm not drunk." At this point, my friend stepped in and tried to assure him everything was fine and convince him to leave. He asked me for another kiss, and I shook my head. "No, thank you." He said, "Don't throw this away," and tried to touch my face. I reiterated, "I met you this evening. I don't know you. I want to go home." He said, "Can I at least have a hug?" and immediately tried to hug me. Pushed him away and said, "I would rather not." He said, "Wow, you're making me feel uncomfortable now." I said I would rather not. Please respect my boundaries. I want to go home. My friend again tried to get him to go home. He said, "No, you're making me feel like I've done something wrong. I just want a hug." "Oh, I know what this is. You're just not used to people accepting you for who you are. You can't handle that I accept you and see you for who you are." "I mean, really?" I said, "That's not the case. I have plenty of people who accept me, but you've made me feel uncomfortable and I'm going home." At this point, I was stood up, backed against the edge of the bench with him standing barely a foot away. I had started shaking because I was feeling anxious, so I just walked away up the street. My friend stayed with him, convincing him to go home. He didn't follow us. I took her to the station and got myself into an Uber. The next day, I handed a report very similar to this to the security at my place of worship, and the dude was promptly barred from entry. I hope people can see the mechanisms of how this situation was set up and can find competence to be more outspoken than I was, because by being polite, I made the situation worse. I know it's not my fault, but I'm very grateful that I'm not timid like I used to be, and now I'm able to absolutely be firm, and if need be, rude about setting my boundary. Therapy is a hell of a drug, and it's doing me wonders. This story happened to me around 6 months ago. I've lived where I live for 3 years. It's a nice apartment in an amazing location, but they were built in the late 90s. The last few years, the city I live in has had a massive population boom and people have been non-stop pouring in. Good weather, amazing economy, and cool place to do stuff always. Because of this, I have seen the landlord's staff start to do heavy maintenance on the apartments to bring them up to date to attract more people to them. My neighbor lived in his apartment for something like 6 years before he ended up buying a house and moved. When he moved, the landlord immediately started redoing his apartment as one to bring up to date. The way that the apartment layout is, there are 2 stories. Where my bedroom is, on the direct other side of the bedroom wall, is the staircase in my neighbor's apartment. The way my bedroom layout is, has my bed right up against that wall. They were completely stripping this place clean. It was one of the first ones that they did such heavy remodeling to. For weeks, I would always see the workers over there painting and redoing the floors. A few days before this happened were no different. I left and saw them doing maintenance on the kitchen, and when I came home from work, they were gone for the day. Nothing unusual, not a single bit. The part that is unusual is what happened one particular night. I was awake around 1 a.m. watching TV in my room when I heard somebody on the other side of the wall slowly walking up the stairs and very obviously stopping halfway up. Where the person was stopping was directly where my head lay on the other side of the wall. I could feel him listening to me breathing. I immediately turned the TV sound off and sat there extremely quiet and still. I heard nothing for a few minutes, and then after what felt like an absolute eternity, I heard the person start walking the rest of the stairs to the second floor. My survival instinct kicked in instantly. It was very obvious that somebody was on the other side of that wall listening to me. I also knew that it was only a few days before this happened that I saw the maintenance redoing that apartment's kitchen. I knew that there was no way somebody already moved in that fast. I obviously couldn't see if there was movement in there from the window, but I had a good angle to see if anybody walked out. I sat there for about 15 minutes, just staring outside to see if I saw anything at all. Nothing. I went back into my room and laid down in bed again. I didn't play the TV, just sat there waiting to hear something again. I was messing around on my phone for about 20 minutes in silence until I heard movement of the stairs again. This time though, the movement didn't start from the top or the bottom. The movement started in the middle of the staircase, meaning that the entire time I was sitting there in silence, this person was just on the other side of the wall listening to my every move. This terrified me, so I called the police. I gave them all the information of what was going on, and they informed me somebody would be out very soon. I went back to one room and watched out the window again. Only a few moments later, a police car pulled up and a cop got out to examine the building and apartment. He was looking around and shining his light in the windows. I heard him knock on the door and shortly after, could hear him talking to somebody but couldn't make out what they were saying. I was totally puzzled by this. The officer walked over to my door and knocked. I went downstairs and he informed me very nicely that somebody just moved in there. I laughed and was completely embarrassed. I even said to the cop that it was a heck of a way to meet your new neighbor. I felt embarrassed, but more importantly, felt very relieved about the entire situation. I brushed off the whole thing as just being late and my mind playing massive tricks on me. The next day, I went to leave my apartment when I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. I went outside and only took a few steps towards my car when I saw maintenance over there carrying out the old refrigerator. I was puzzled. I walked over to the apartment and I looked in the door that was wide open. The kitchen was still being worked on and not a single piece of furniture could be seen. I was legitimately speechless. I walked over to a maintenance man and said, "Didn't somebody move in here?" And he informed me no, and that the apartment wouldn't be ready for showings until at least 3 weeks. I ran back upstairs into my apartment and called my landlord. I asked her if somebody was staying there and she said absolutely not. I told her about what I experienced the night before and she was floored. She told me that they would change that apartment's locks immediately. She also suggested that I call the non-emergency line to the police department and inform them that nobody lives there. I did just that, and they asked me to come down to the station. I told them all the information in detail of what happened. They were able to quickly figure out what officer came out to check out the situation so he could help identify the person who answered the door. The officer described the man in detail, and I confirmed that I have never seen him around the apartments before. There was a search around town for a few weeks until the whole thing just sort of fizzled out. and I stopped hearing about it and started seeing fewer and fewer patrol cars randomly in the parking lot. After that night, I never heard anything in that apartment. Around a month later, an older couple moved in and they were very nice. When I saw the moving van pull up, I went to introduce myself to them, but to be completely honest, the only reason I went out there was to see if any of them matched the description of who the cops saw. Not even close. I'm certain that the person who was in that apartment got away with it. I had an extremely hard time sleeping the following weeks after that happened to me. I actually ended up moving my bed into the smaller second bedroom because it bothered me so much. I had zero idea what the intentions of this person were or what he was doing on that staircase, but it's easily one of the most chilling things that's ever happened to me. So, random man that's listening to me sleep, let's not meet again. I'll start out by saying that I'm not a writer by any means. I suck at it, but I will try my best. For a bit of backstory, my mom was dating an abusive prick at this time. We'll call him Ian. Because of Ian and the crazy fights they had gotten into, we couldn't lock up my house at all. He had kicked in both the front and back door to the house, and they were never fixed. My mother and Ian were at the bar all day, every day. I told you this so you know why the house wasn't locked up and where my parents were when this happened. This incident occurred when I was around 12 years old and my little brother was around 10. I was a pretty smart girl at this age and my brother was sick all the time, so he was very tiny and frail. My mother and Ian were at the bar as usual. When you opened my front door, it put you in the living room and you could see the back door. There was a hallway to the right that led back into the bedrooms, and that is where my brother and I were. We were in his bedroom with the door closed, playing something on the PlayStation. It was around midnight or 1 a.m. and we were playing and having a good time when I heard a weird noise. My brother didn't hear it and I didn't want to creep him out. I told him that I wanted to get a drink and told him to stay in the room and I would bring him something. To get to my kitchen, you would have to walk down the hallway in front of both the front and back doors because it was behind the living room. Kept hearing strange noises, so before I left out of my brother's room, I told him to get into the closet and work on our fort so that it would be ready when I was done getting our drinks and a snack. I raised my little brother for the most part and took care of him. I had a terrible feeling, a sense of dread. I could tell something wasn't right, and this was a way to get my brother to hide without scaring him. He frightened easily and had really bad asthma attacks, and at this time, we had no inhaler or his breathing treatment machine for him. Good going, Ma. I knew if he started having an asthma attack on top of being scared, it wouldn't be pretty. Anyways, I left the back room and decided to see what was going on. Because I was such a badass at 12 years old, but I had to protect my little brother. Started sneaking up the hallway as slowly and quietly as I could. I was terrified. I could feel that something was wrong. Before I made it to the end of the hallway, I heard a man. It sounded like he was growling. It was a deep, terrifying noise. Can't explain it, but the feeling that washed over me damn near made me puke. So I, of course, freeze. I have no one in this town. I don't know anyone, and my dad is living in a different state. My mom is at the bar drunk as heck. I was sitting there trying to gather the courage to see what was around the corner and going over my options when I heard my brother's door open. He sees me and the look on my face and freezes. I remember his eyes going so wide with fear because he must have heard the growl or whatever it was too. I motioned to him with my hands to go back in the room and he does. I gathered the courage to peek around the corner and what I saw still freaks me out to this day. It was horrifying. I saw a man probably around 6'6" and 300 pounds, sitting on my couch with a wicked grin on his face. That grin and the look in his eyes will forever be burned into my head. By some stupid luck, the man didn't see me. I so slowly snuck back to my brother's room. I slowly shut the door and started going over my options. My little brother was already, of course, horrified because of the growling noise this man was making. I'm so thankful that he wasn't the one who saw what was out there. I mustered my brave big sister face and calmly told him that there was a man that I didn't know on the couch and he needed to be very quiet and I needed him to be brave and keep his breathing in check. My little brother adored me and looked up to me, so when I told him that I needed him to be brave, he tried his best. I told him not to move and he didn't. The first thing I tried was the window, but it wouldn't budge. It was completely stuck. I'm making myself stay calm for my brother's sake, but I know what's sitting out there. So, since the window was stuck, I decided to start looking for a weapon. My older brother lived here, and I know he had swords somewhere. I don't remember where he was. As I'm looking for a weapon, I hear the man sing, "I know you're here." Man, my stomach knotted up. The hair on the back of my neck rose, and I instantly got a cold sweat. And then I hear it. My little brother had started wheezing. Asthma attack. I hugged him, reminded him about being brave, and told him to sit still and focus on his breathing. I started frantically trying to get my window open, but it was stuck. I looked around and started moving blankets when I found my older brother's cell phone that he always forgot. I remember thinking that I was lucky and felt a bit of relief. I immediately called the police and told them what was happening, hysterical at this point but still remaining quiet. The dispatcher told me to remain on the phone so she could hear what was happening when the man started banging on our bedroom door. It had been about 5 minutes into the phone call when this happened, and I could no longer remain calm. I lost it. I started screaming. I mean, like a blood-curdling scream. The kind that would send chills down your spine if you heard it. I forgot to mention that our bedroom had the only working lock, so the door was locked. He was trying to get in and banging on the door. His banging got louder and louder. He was screaming to let him in when it went completely silent. Then he did the creepiest, most terrifying thing ever. He started laughing. You know, I could just bust down this door in about 2 seconds, right, little girl? Tap, tap, tap. Now he's lightly knocking on the door and asking for me to open it. His demeanor completely changed. I then heard a scraping at the door. What I had imagined it was in my 12-year-old head was he was scraping the door with his really long fingernails or something. But that wasn't the case. Then I hear the police start screaming at him to get on the ground, put his hands up, etc. I heard him putting up a fight, followed by more yelling and eventually silence. After a few minutes, there was a knock on my door, but at this point I was too terrified to open it. I thought that this nightmare guy was still there, so being in my hysterical state, I started screaming, "No, no, no, please," over and over again. I couldn't stay brave for my little brother anymore. I was on the floor holding him this whole time, convinced that we were going to die. Eventually, I calmed myself a bit, and this time a female officer was at the door, so I opened it. There were about 5 cops standing in the hallway listening to me being hysterical. I refused to let go of my brother at this point, but we both ran to this female officer and just collapsed. We had been so scared. It turns out this guy was completely wasted and high on drugs. I remember the cops walking me up to him and having me stand in front of him to ask me if I knew this man. I didn't, but I'll never forget standing in front of this huge man, looking into his brown eyes that were completely bloodshot and filled with hatred. I'll never forget that growling noise that he was making, or the look of pure horror in my little brother's eyes. My parents were called and investigated for leaving us alone like that and for the doors being like that. My mom is a different person now. She doesn't drink and is now married to a cop. She has completely changed. I remember asking her about it later on, and she told me something that I didn't know. The man had a huge knife, so that's what he was scraping the door with. And he also had some rope, tape, and a tarp. I still don't know how he didn't get to us, or why he didn't just bust down the door to get us. It would have taken one half-ass kick from him to kick down the door. It was super thin. It creeps me out still, and I have had nightmares from it. My husband doesn't understand why I get so furious with him when he leaves the door unlocked at night. I work 3rd shift, so I'll come home and the door will be unlocked. It's infuriating because I then have to go through every room in the house and check the closets and the other places that a person could hide. I have 2 kids and they will never ever go through what I did. Sorry for my shitty writing style, but I wanted to tell my story after lurking here for so long. Back in my younger days, when I was still living with roommates, I had what turned out to be the most obvious of dangerous encounters. I was looking to move and I was about to leave to see a place in the perfect location with a good price, and two seemingly professional male roomies. At the last minute, my boyfriend suggested that he goes along because the place is nearby and they'll have to meet him at some point anyways. We get there and I introduce myself, and the one roommate seems a little taken aback at the fact that I had somebody with me. I suppose it could be seen as unusual to bring your boyfriend, but I figured, oh well, the damage has already been done. If they don't allow me to be their roommate simply because he's with me, I can't do anything about it now. Let's just see the place. The apartment is huge. We're both suitably impressed until we turn the corner of the living room and we see it. A 2 cameras set up with a light pointed at the couch. There's a guy sitting on the couch who is introduced as the other roommate. He jumps off of the couch and gives my boyfriend the same weird look. I now realize the look they were giving was disappointment. I shoot my boyfriend a very quick look of understanding, but we silently decide to continue with the tour so as to not escalate the situation. I casually joke that it's nice to have a camera so I can videotape myself for my auditions. They both laugh much too hard and say, "Yeah, that's what we were doing." He brings us over to my room and it's literally a broom closet. You wouldn't even be able to fit a single-sized bed in there. It's now patently obvious that there was never a room for rent in the first place. I take this opportunity to get out there by saying, "Oh, that's too bad. I have a queen bed and I won't be able to fit." "Okay, well, thanks for your time." We get out to the street and walk around the corner without saying a word. When we finally look at each other, it's in this stunned silence. He just hugged me really tight and we went for a walk in the park.